Hello everyone, and welcome to the Fictional Vortex. So we are back with an interesting movie on what if Naruto was a legendary stranded with the power to regen. Erase from any wound, Naruto x Anya Stroud, Gears of War. But before we start, I just want to remind you to please subscribe to my channel and hit the like button if you enjoy my content. Let's start the story. Chapter 1. The Sky Fallen Demon. The sky wept black tears. They fell not as gentle rain, but as a hissing, corrosive torrent, each drop a tiny messenger of decay. They sizzled against the skeletal remains of what had once been a city, charring the fractured concrete and dissolving the rust-brown husks of vehicles that littered the dead streets like ancient carcasses. The wind, a mournful accompanist, howled through the hollowed-out eyes of skeletal skyscrapers, carrying with it the fine, gray powder of pulverized buildings and the cloying, sweet and sour stench of old rot and new corruption. This was the outskirts of Monter, a name that had long ago lost its meaning, now just another pockmark of ruin on the scarred face of Sarah. In the epicenter of a freshly carved crater, where the very earth was still smoking from an impact that defied conventional explanation, something moved. It was a slow, deliberate motion, a stirring amidst the settling dust and the relentless, acidic downpour. First, a hand. Fingers flexing and unflexing as if reacquainting themselves with the simple act of existence. The skin was tanned, calloused, and streaked with a mixture of mud and crimson. Then, an arm, pushing upwards with a strength that belied the stillness that had preceded it. Naruto Uzumaki pushed himself to a sitting position, the world swimming back into focus in a nauseating kaleidoscope of gray, black, and angry red. A groan escaped his lips, a low, guttural sound of pure, physical agony. He ran a hand through his spiky, sun-blonde hair, now matted with grime and something unpleasantly sticky. His head felt like 1,000 forging hammers were trying to beat it into a new, unwelcome shape. His memories were a chaotic storm, a whirlwind of blinding light, screaming vortexes of power, and a final, bone-jarring snap as reality itself had seemed to tear asunder. Kagaya. The final battle. A desperate, last-ditch gambit with a space-time ninjutsu that had gone catastrophically, cosmically wrong. He blinked, the acid rain stinging his eyes. This wasn't the verdant, life-filled landscape of the elemental nations. This was a charnel house. A graveyard that stretched to the horizon. The very air felt wrong. Thin and tainted with chemicals and a deeper, more primal wrongness. The chakra in the atmosphere was gone. Not just thin, but utterly absent. It was like a fish being thrown from the ocean into a desert of suffocating sand. He could feel his own vast reserve swirling within him, a raging sea trapped inside a bottle, but the world outside offered nothing to draw upon. No natural energy to supplement his own. He was a self-contained, finite system. A daunting, deeply unsettling thought. A ragged, shuddering breath racked his frame. He looked down at himself. His traditional shinobi attire was in tatters, the vibrant orange and black now little more than scorched rags clinging to his body. The real problem, however, was the gaping, ugly wound in his abdomen. A piece of shrapnel, a jagged shard of twisted metal from some unknown source, was embedded deep in his gut, having torn through muscle and organs with brutal efficiency. It was a wound that would have been fatal to any other living being, a death sentence delivered with crude, mechanical indifference. For Naruto, it was merely an inconvenience. With a grunt of effort, he gripped the protruding metal. His fingers, slick with his own blood, slipped on the first attempt. He tightened his grip, his knuckles white, and pulled. The sound was obscene, a wet, tearing squelch as the shard was wrenched free from his flesh. He tossed it aside with a clatter, the metal steaming as the rain hit it. The hole in his body was a horrific sight. A crater of torn meat and viscera from which his life force should have been pouring out. But it wasn't. Instead, something miraculous and monstrous was happening. Tendrils of brilliant, golden chakra, visible even in the grim twilight of this dead world, began to flow towards the wound. They were not just healing it, but actively rebuilding it. Muscle fibers knitted themselves together at an impossible rate. Severed veins and arteries reconnected. The flow of blood staunching and reversing its course. Damaged organs pulsed and reformed, purging the damage as if it were a foreign impurity. The skin, the final layer, flowed like molten wax over the injury, leaving behind not a scar, but smooth, unblemished flesh, marred only by the drying blood. The entire process took less than 10 seconds. He flexed his abdominal muscles, the feeling of wholeness returning with a familiar, almost boring, certainty. This was his curse, his greatest weapon, the power that had made him a legend and a monster in his own world. The Kyuubi's chakra, long since tamed and integrated with his own, had mutated his Uzumaki healing factor into something beyond comprehension. He could regenerate from any wound, no matter how grievous, as long as a single cell of his body remained. He had tested this theory more times than he cared to remember. He was, for all intents and purposes, functionally immortal. A god of resilience in a world of fragile, mortal men. And right now, utterly, completely stranded, he rose to his feet, his senses, honed by a lifetime of war, kicking into high alert. The rain, the wind, the groaning of stressed metal, these were the baseline sounds. But there was something else. A new sound, carried on the wind. A rhythmic, chittering, scraping noise. It was the sound of movement. Multiple contacts, heavy, and getting closer. He turned his head, his cerulean blue eyes narrowing, piercing the gloom. They came from the skeletal maw of a collapsed underpass, their forms barely distinguishable from the shifting shadows. They were large, bigger than any man, with a hunched, brutish posture. Their skin was a pale, sickly gray, thick and leathery like a reptile's hide. They moved with a disconcerting, loping gait, their heavy falls punctuated by the metallic scrape of the weapons they carried. These were not men. They were abominations. There were 5 of them. Each one was a hulking mass of muscle and sinew, their faces a nightmare of sharp, needle-like teeth and flat, black, soulless eyes. They carried crude, but effective-looking firearms, bulky things that seemed to be part machine, part organic growth. One of them, larger than the others, let out a guttural roar, a sound that was less a challenge and more a declaration of carnivorous intent. Naruto's posture shifted, his weariness vanished, replaced by the coiled, predatory stillness of a veteran warrior. He didn't know what these things were, or where they came from, but their intent was unmistakable. It was the universal language of violence, a language he was more fluent in than any other. A flicker of something that might have been a smirk touched his lips. He had faced down armies of shinobi, tailed beasts the size of mountains, and a literal goddess who could shatter dimensions. These things were just ugly. Right, he murmured to himself, his voice a low, calm rumble. New world, new pests. The lead creature, the big one, raised its weapon. It was a crude assault rifle, and it spat a stream of heavy caliber rounds with a deafening, percussive roar. The bullets tore through the air, aimed directly at Naruto's center mass. To a normal human, it would have been an execution. To Naruto, it was a dance. He moved. There was no wasted motion, no flourish, just pure, unadulterated speed. He flowed to the left, the bullets whipping past where he had been a microsecond before, gouging out chunks of the crater wall behind him. He didn't just dodge. He moved with an intuitive understanding of trajectories and firing patterns, a combat sixth sense that bordered on precognition. He was already closing the distance before the creature had finished its first burst. He channeled a precise amount of chakra to the soles of his feet, granting him a burst of explosive speed. The ground cracked beneath his feet as he launched himself forward, a blonde blur against the gray backdrop. He covered the 50 meters separating them in the time it took the creature to adjust its aim. The creature's beady black eyes widened in what might have been shock. It was too slow, pathetically slow. Naruto's fist, wrapped in a swirling cowl of incandescent blue chakra, slammed into its chest. It wasn't a simple punch. It was a Rasengan, a spiraling sphere of pure, compressed power. The impact was not explosive. It was absolute. The Rasengan didn't just strike. It ground, it tore, it eviscerated. The creature's thick hide and the dense muscle beneath it offered no resistance. The spiraling chakra bored a perfect, cavernous hole straight through its torso, turning bone, organs, and armor into a superheated spray of gore that erupted from its back. The creature was dead before its body, now little more than a hollowed-out shell, was flung backwards, crashing into one of its comrades with the force of a runaway truck. The remaining 4 creatures paused, their primitive brains struggling to process the sudden, violent demise of their leader. That hesitation was all Naruto needed. He landed in a low crouch amidst them, a predator in the fold. One of them swung its rifle at him like a club. Naruto ducked under the clumsy blow, his hand shooting out to grip the creature's wrist. He squeezed. There was a sickening crunch of bone. The creature shrieked, a high-pitched, pig-like squeal of pain, dropping its weapon. Naruto didn't relent. He spun, using the creature's own momentum against it, and hurled it directly into the path of another one that was trying to bring its weapon to bear. The two abominations collided in a tangle of limbs and guttural cries. Before they could recover, Naruto was on them. He moved between them like a phantom, his hands and feet a blur of precise, devastating strikes. An elbow strike to the throat of one, crushing its windpipe. A spinning heel kick to the temple of the other, snapping its neck with an audible crack. They fell like puppets with their strings cut, their heavy bodies thudding to the wet ground. Two left. They had backed away, their initial aggression replaced by a primal fear. They raised their rifles, their hands trembling. They fired, not in controlled bursts, but in a panicked, indiscriminate spray of bullets. Naruto didn't even bother to dodge. He simply stood his ground, his arms crossed nonchalantly over his chest. He wanted to see what these weapons could really do. The heavy caliber rounds slammed into him, tearing through his tattered clothes and sinking into his flesh. The impacts felt like being punched by a dozen giant fists simultaneously. They ripped through his shoulders, his chest, his legs, gouging out fist-sized chunks of tissue. One lucky shot even grazed his cheek, tearing a bloody furrow just below his eye. To any observer, it would have looked like a man being torn to pieces. And he was. But as quickly as the wounds appeared, they were vanishing. The golden chakra, his silent, ever-present partner, was already at work. The bullet holes filled in, the torn flesh reknitting itself. The blood flow ceasing almost as soon as it began. The bullet slugs themselves were pushed out by the rapidly regenerating muscle, falling to the ground with soft, wet plops. He stood there, weathering the storm of lead, completely unperturbed. The flesh on his cheek sealed itself, leaving his skin as smooth and unmarred as it had been moments before. He lowered his arms, a look of mild disappointment on his face. "Is that it?" he asked, though he knew the creatures couldn't understand him. "My turn." He vanished. One moment he was standing there, a target. The next, he was gone. The two creatures stopped firing, their beady eyes darting around wildly, their fear now palpable. One of them let out a nervous chitter, a sound of pure terror. A shadow fell over it from above. It looked up, its jaw falling slack. Naruto was descending from the sky, having used a chakra-powered leap to launch himself high into the air. He was coming down like a meteor, his right leg extended. His heel aimed at the creature's head. The axe kick, as his late, lamented master had called it, was a simple, yet brutally effective technique. Especially when backed by the strength of a demigod. His heel connected with the top of the creature's skull. The force of the impact didn't just break its neck, it drove its head down into its own torso with a sound like a watermelon being dropped from a great height. The creature's body convulsed for a second, then collapsed into a grotesque, compressed heap. The final creature stood frozen, its primitive mind utterly broken by the display of impossible power it had just witnessed. It dropped its weapon, a rattling clatter in the sudden silence, and turned to flee. It didn't get 2 steps. Naruto landed softly, his feet barely making a sound on the wet ground. He made a single, intricate hand sign, the ram seal. "Wind style. Great breakthrough," he whispered. He inhaled deeply, his chest expanding, and then exhaled a powerful, concentrated gust of wind. It wasn't a hurricane, but a focused, invisible blade of compressed air. The blast struck the fleeing creature in the back. It didn't push it. It flayed it. The foe, RCE, was so great that it stripped the flesh from its bones in a single, horrific instant, sending a spray of blood and tissue flying into the rain-slicked street. The creature's skeleton, held together for a moment by sheer momentum, ran another step before collapsing into a clattering pile of bleached bone. The silence that followed was profound, broken only by the hiss of the acid rain and the mournful howl of the wind. Naruto stood amidst the carnage, the blood and viscera of the 5 creatures painting a gruesome tableau around him. The rain was already washing it away, cleansing the scene, but the memory of the swift, brutal violence lingered. He took a slow, deep breath, the tainted air a poor substitute for the clean, crisp air of his homeland. He felt nothing. No thrill of victory, no remorse, no satisfaction. It was just pest control. A necessary, messy business. He had been doing it for so long, fighting for his life, for his village, for his world, that the act of killing had become as natural and as thoughtless as breathing. It was in this moment of quiet contemplation, standing in a circle of his own making, that he realized he was being watched. Far above the ruined city, nestled within the armored shell of a remote command and control center known as a raven's nest, Anya Stroud stared at the monitor, her knuckles white where she gripped the edge of her console. Her normally placid, professional demeanor was shattered, replaced by a mask of pure, unadulterated disbelief. Control, this is Nest 1. I am witnessing. I don't know what I'm witnessing, she said, her voice a strained whisper. The comms officer at the adjacent station gave her a concerned look. Nest 1, this is Control. Please clarify, a calm, male voice crackled back through her headset. Quote, we tracked a high-energy atmospheric event in your sector. Unidentified. Is it related? Related. Anya let out a short, sharp laugh that was completely out of character. It is the event. She re-centered the main camera. A high-powered optical zoom that could read the date on a coin from 2 kilometers up. The feed was grainy, distorted by the acid rain and the atmospheric interference, but the image was unmistakable. A single man, clad in rags, standing in the middle of a locust patrol he had just annihilated. She had watched the entire thing. The initial contact, the impossible speed, the glowing blue spiral of energy that had cored their leader like an apple. The casual, almost contemptuous way he had dispatched the others. And then, the final, horrifying display. She had seen him get shot. Repeatedly. She had seen the wounds, the blood, the chunks of flesh being torn away. And she had seen them vanish. Anya, what's going on? The voice of Colonel Victor Hoffman, patched in from command, was a familiar, gravelly bark in her ear. Report, Colonel, she began, her mind racing to find the right words, the right military jargon to describe the impossible. An unidentified male, Caucasian, blonde hair, appears to be metahuman. He has engaged and neutralized a locust patrol, single-handedly. Extreme prejudice. There was a moment of silence on the line. Metahuman. Stroud, have you been hitting the rationed coffee too hard? There's no such thing. With all due respect, Colonel, I am watching him right now, Anya insisted, her eyes glued to the screen. The patrol opened fire. Multiple hits. Center mass. The wounds, they're healing. Instantly. He's showing no signs of injury. She manipulated the controls, rewinding the captured footage and playing it back on a secondary screen. Highlighting the moment Naruto had been riddled with bullets. She tagged the before and after frames and sent the data packet to command. The silence on the line was longer this time. When Hoffman spoke again, his voice had lost its dismissive edge, replaced by a tone of cautious, intense interest. My God, what in the hell is he? I don't know, sir, Anya admitted. But he's not one of ours. And he's not stranded. His clothing, it's like nothing I've ever seen. On the screen, the lone figure turned his head, his gaze sweeping the ruined skyline. It was an idle, searching glance, but then he stopped. He tilted his head, and his eyes, even through the low-resolution feed, seemed to look directly at the hidden camera. As if he could feel her watching him. A cold shiver traced its way down Anya's spine. It was impossible. The camera was miles away, camouflaged, silent. But the certainty of it, the feeling of being seen by that impossible man, was undeniable. He knows we're here, she breathed. Send a bird, Hoffman ordered, his voice decisive. I want him, now. I don't care what you have to do. Sedate him, capture him, but do not, I repeat, do not kill him. I want to know what he is. That kind of regeneration. Stroud, do you have any idea what that could mean for the war effort? Anya's mind was already running through the possibilities, the strategic implications of a soldier who couldn't be killed. It was staggering. It was a game changer. It was hope, in a form she had never imagined. Yes, Colonel, she replied, her professionalism reasserting itself. I understand completely. She toggled a new channel. KR59er, this is Nest 1, do you copy? 59er here, Go ahead, Nest, a pilot's voice responded. I have a priority tasking for you. Grid 34 GAMMA7. You are to locate and secure a high-value asset. Asset is a single male, on foot. Be advised, asset is to be considered extremely dangerous, but you are to take him alive at all costs. I'm uploading the coordinates now. Roger that, Nest 1. On our way. Anya watched as, on her tactical map, the icon for the King Raven helicopter changed its course, heading directly for the crater. Shish. Switched her view back to the main screen, her heart pounding in her chest. The man was still standing there, unmoving, his gaze still fixed in her direction. He seemed to be waiting. Naruto watched as the strange, flying metal beast descended from the perpetually gray sky. It was loud, ugly, and beat the air into submission with two massive, spinning blades on its top. It bore the sigil of a stylized cog, a symbol that meant nothing to him. A door on its side slid open, revealing several figures inside, all clad in bulky, heavy armor that made them look like walking tanks. They held weapons that were a clear evolution of the crude firearms the gray creatures had been using. A powerful spotlight from the front of the machine pinned him, bathing him in a harsh, white glare. A voice, amplified by some sort of speaker, boomed down at him. This is the coalition of ordered governments. You are in a restricted zone. Drop any weapons and surrender immediately. Naruto raised an eyebrow. He glanced down at his empty hands. Then back up at the hovering craft. He didn't have any weapons, not in the traditional sense. His body was the weapon. And surrender. He hadn't surrendered to anyone or anything in his entire life. It wasn't in his nature. He stood his ground, making no move to comply. He was curious. These were clearly the dominant faction in this world, or at least they thought they were. They were organized, technologically advanced, and from the sound of it, very, very fond of giving orders. He saw ropes drop from the open door, and 4 of the armored figures began to rappel down with practiced efficiency. They landed in a semicircle around him, their weapons trained on his chest. They were professional, disciplined. Their movements were precise, but they were slow, so incredibly slow. He could see the slight tremor in the hands of the one on the far right. He could hear the nervous, shallow breathing of the one directly in front of him. They were afraid. They had clearly been briefed on what he had done. On your knees, hands behind your head, now, the lead soldier barked, his voice muffled by his helmet. Naruto remained standing, a placid, almost bored expression on his face. He wanted to see what they would do. He needed to gauge their rules of engagement, their level of aggression. He needed information, and these walking tin cans were his first, best source. Last warning, freak, the soldier shouted, his patience clearly wearing thin. Naruto offered them a small, disarming smile. I don't think so, he said, his voice calm and clear, easily reeing over the roar of the helicopter's rotors. That was all it took. The soldier gave a hand signal, and from the side, another soldier raised a different kind of rifle. It wasn't designed to fire bullets. It had a large, cylindrical canister attached to it. The soldier fired. There was a soft thump, and a small dart shot out, trailing a thin wire. Naruto could have dodged it. He could have caught it in midair. He could have been a mile away before it ever reached him. Instead, he let it hit him. The dart embedded itself in his shoulder with a sharp sting. He felt a powerful electric current surge through his body. It was designed to incapacitate, to overload the nervous system of a normal man. His muscles spasmed violently. The pain was intense, a white-hot fire that raced along every nerve. He gritted his teeth, his body locking up as the voltage coursed through him. To the soldiers, it looked like their taser was working perfectly. He was seizing, convulsing, about to collapse. But inside Naruto, a war was being fought. The foreign electricity was an invader in his system. And his chakra, ever vigilant, rose to meet it. The golden energy surged through his tenketsu, his chakra pathways, overwhelming the artificial current, absorbing it, neutralizing it. The convulsions stopped. He stood up straight, his body no longer spasming. He reached up, plucked the dart from his shoulder with a casual tug, and dropped it to the ground. The wound it had left was already gone. He looked at the 4 soldiers, whose postures had gone from aggressive to utterly stunned. The lead Ye's jaw was practically on the floor of his helmet. That was rude, Naruto said, his smile gone, replaced by an unnerving, icy calm. Before any of them could react, a new voice cut through the air, this one from the helicopter speaker. It was a woman's voice. Calm, clear, and authoritative. Hold your fire. All units, hold your fire. Stand down. The soldiers hesitated, looking up at the King Raven, then back at Naruto. Asset. The woman's voice continued, now directed at him. We can do this the easy way, or we can do this the hard way. We have a lot of questions for you. And judging by the crater you're standing in, you probably have a few for us. We are not your enemy. The things you just fought, those are our enemy. We're offering you a parley. A chance to talk. No more tasers, no more guns. Naruto considered her words. It was a logical, reasonable offer. He was in a strange, hostile world. He needed allies, or at least information. Fighting these soldiers would be pointless, a waste of energy. And the woman's voice, there was something in it. A note of intelligence, of pragmatism, that intrigued him. He looked up at the helicopter, his eyes seeming to bore through the metal hull. Straight to the woman who was speaking. He gave a slow, deliberate nod. A rope ladder was dropped from the helicopter. The lead soldier, still looking rattled, gestured towards it with his rifle. After you, he said, his voice now lacking all of its earlier bravado. Naruto walked past the soldiers, not even giving them a second glance. He grabbed onto the rope ladder and began to climb, his movements fluid and effortless. As he ascended, the wind from the rotors whipped his tattered clothes and his blonde hair around him. He looked down at the ruined city, at the bodies of the creatures he had slain, at the small, armored figures of the soldiers who were now scrambling to get back on their own ropes. This world was a mess. A broken, dying place. But it was also a place with new challenges, new mysteries. And for a man who had known nothing but conflict his entire life, for a warrior with no master and no home, that was almost appealing. He didn't know what the future held. He didn't know if he would ever find a way back to his own world. But as he pulled himself up into the noisy, vibrating belly of the metal beast, into the heart of the unknown, one thing was certain. The stranded Ronin of Sarah had arrived. And nothing would ever be the same. Chapter 1 end. Here is Chapter 2. Chapter 2. The Logic of Monsters. The belly of the metal beast was a symphony of jarring sensations. The floor vibrated with a deep, resonant thrum that pulsed up through the soles of Naruto's bare feet, a constant, mechanical heartbeat that felt utterly alien. The air was thick with the smells of ozone, hot metal, and the faint, acrid tang of gunpowder, a scent he knew as intimately as the smell of ramen. It was a confined space, all hard angles and utilitarian gray plating, the walls lined with racks of unfamiliar weaponry and grim-faced soldiers who watched him with a mixture of awe and undisguised fear. They were trying to be subtle, their eyes darting towards him when they thought he wasn't looking. But to Naruto's senses, their scrutiny was as loud as a shout. He sat on the cold metal bench, his posture relaxed, a stark contrast to the rigid tension of the armored figures around him. He ignored them, his attention focused outwards. Through the open doorway, he watched the world scroll by beneath them. It was a panorama of relentless, soul-crushing desolation. Ruined cities bled into cratered farmlands, which in turn gave way to skeletal forests, the trees petrified and black, clawing at the perpetually overcast sky like the hands of the dying. There were no signs of vibrant life, no patches of green, no sparkling rivers, only gray, brown, and the sickly, rust red of decay. It was a world that had been bled dry, a corpse picked clean by scavengers. He had seen destruction before. He had walked through villages leveled by rogue shinobi, battlefields scarred by monolithic-tailed beasts. But this was different. This was not the sharp, violent wound of a battle. This was the slow, cancerous death of a world. The sheer scale of it was breathtakingly horrific. What kind of power, what kind of enemy, could inflict such a wound upon an entire planet? The woman's voice, the same calm, authoritative one from the speaker, crackled in the helmet of the soldier nearest to him. ETA 2 minutes, Delta. Status on the asset. The soldier, who Naruto had mentally labeled, lead grunt, startled slightly before replying into his helmet comm. Asset is, cooperative, control. Quiet. Naruto turned his head slightly, his gaze falling upon the soldier. He offered a small, knowing smile. "I can hear you. You know," he said, his voice easily cutting through the engine's roar. "The acoustics in here are surprisingly good." The soldier flinched as if struck. The other soldiers shifted uncomfortably, the clank of their armor a testament to their unease. He had deliberately spoken in their language, a tongue he had assimilated with unnatural speed. It was a subconscious application of chakra, a technique he had used long ago to understand the frogs of Mount Myoboku. His mind simply adapted, absorbing the patterns and vocabulary from the soldiers' brief shouts and the helicopter's speaker system. It was another small miracle that he kept tucked away, another piece of the puzzle that was Naruto Uzumaki. Before the soldier could stammer a reply, the helicopter banked sharply. Through the doorway, a new vista appeared. It was a fortress, carved into the side of a massive, sheer rock face. It wasn't built so much as it was integrated into the mountain itself. A scar of reinforced concrete and gunmetal gray steel against the natural stone. Searchlights swept across the sky, and anti-aircraft emplacements dotted the cliffs like metallic thorns. It was a place built for one purpose: to withstand a siege. The King Raven swooped towards a cavernous opening in the mountainside, a hangar bay buzzing with activity. Figures in uniforms moved with purpose. DST parked vehicles and stacks of munitions. The helicopter touched down with a final, jarring shudder, and the world outside the door resolved into the harsh, fluorescent glare of the hangar. "All right, Asset, welcome to Anvil Gate," Lead Grunt said, his voice regaining a sliver of its former authority now that they were on home turf. "Let's go for a walk." Naruto rose to his feet, stretching his arms over his head with a yawn. As if waking from a boring nap, he hopped off the helicopter onto the concrete floor, his bare feet making a soft slapping sound. The air here was different, filtered, sterile, with the faint scent of antiseptic. It was cold, a stark contrast to the humid, toxic air outside. The 4 soldiers of Delta Squad, he'd picked up their designation from their calm chatter, formed a diamond formation around him. Their rifles held at a low ready. It was a professional, well-practiced escort for a high-risk prisoner. To Naruto, it felt more like a parade. He could be gone BEF. Or they even had time to register his absence, a whisper of wind in the bustling hangar. But the woman's voice had offered a parley, and he was, if nothing else, a man of his word. He was also deeply, profoundly curious. They marched him through a series of corridors that were as bleak and functional as the fortress's exterior. The walls were bare concrete, the floors polished steel that reflected the merciless overhead lights. They passed other soldiers, all of whom stopped and stared, their faces a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. Whispers followed in their wake, a ripple of rumor spreading through the base. "Is that him? The one from the Monter crater? They say he can't be killed." Naruto ignored them all, his senses focused on a different target. He could feel her presence before he saw her. A steady, focused mind. A calm heartbeat amidst the general anxiety of the base. It was a subtle energy, nothing like the vibrant chakra signatures he was used to, but it was distinct. It was the woman from the comms. They stopped before a heavy, reinforced steel door. Lead Grunt swiped a keycard, and the door hissed open, revealing a room that was stark and bare. A single metal tab, low, was bolted to the floor in the center, with 2 chairs, one on each side. One wall was a large, one-way mirror, a feature so comically obvious that Naruto almost laughed. "In you go," Lead Grunt ordered, gesturing with his rifle. Naruto walked into the room without hesitation and took a seat, not the one they clearly intended for him, but the one on the same side as the door, his back to the wall, giving him a clear view of the entrance and the mirror. It was a small act of defiance, a subtle reclaiming of control. He crossed his arms over his chest and waited. The 4 soldiers remained outside. The door hissed shut, leaving him in silence. He could feel their presence just outside the door, and behind the mirror, he could sense at least 2 others. One of them had a heartbeat like a nervous rabbit. The other was the calm one. The woman. A few minutes passed. It was a deliberate ploy, he knew. Let the subject stew, build the anxiety. It was a standard interrogation tactic. One he'd seen Ibiki Morino use 100 times. It was also completely ineffective on him. He could sit here for a week without feeling a flicker of unease. He closed his eyes, extending his sensory range, and began to map out the immediate section of the base in his mind. He counted 37 life signs within a 50-meter radius. He noted the location of power conduits, ventilation shafts, and structural weaknesses. It was a habit, ingrained from a lifetime of infiltration and warfare. Always know your environment. Always have an escape route. The door hissed open again. She was not what he expected. In his mind, the owner of that calm, authoritative voice had been an older, stern-faced matron, hardened by years of war. The woman who entered was young, perhaps in her mid-20s, with intelligent, clear blue eyes that held a startling intensity. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a neat, professional bun, and her uniform, a standard COG officer's tunic, was immaculate. She carried no weapon, only a data slate. She was attractive, but it was a secondary observation, eclipsed by the palpable aura of competence and intelligence she projected. This was Anya Stroud. She closed the door behind her and walked to the table, her movements graceful and deliberate. She didn't seem intimidated by him in the slightest. Her gaze was direct, analytical, like a scientist studying a new, fascinating specimen. She pulled out the other chair and sat down, placing the data slate on the table between them. "I'm Lieutenant Anya Stroud," she said, her voice the same one he'd heard in the helicopter, but softer now, without the electronic amplification. "And you are?" Naruto leaned back in his chair, a faint, amused smirk playing on his lips. "I have many names," he replied, his voice a low, even baritone. "Most of them are probably not on any of your lists. For now, you can call me Naruto." "Naruto," she repeated, testing the name on her tongue. It was foreign, unfamiliar. She tapped a command into her slate, likely running the name through a database she already knew was empty. "That name is not of Sarah." "Where are you from?" "A place very far away," he said evasively. "Farther than you can imagine. I had a transportation accident." "The atmospheric event we tracked," Anya surmised, her eyes never leaving his. "A high-energy spatial displacement." "That's the theory, anyway. It sounds like something out of a science fiction novel." "The best stories often do," Naruto countered smoothly. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table, his gaze locking with hers. The chess match had begun. "Now, I believe a parley is a two-way street, Lieutenant. You have me. You've seen what I can do. I answered your summons. Now, I have questions. Where am I? What were those gray things I fought? And why does your entire world feel like it's holding its breath, waiting to die?" Anya's expression didn't flicker, but he saw a new flicker of respect in her eyes. He wasn't just a brute, a freak of nature. He was intelligent. He was playing the game. She decided to give him something, a gesture of good faith. "You are on the planet Sarah," she began, her tone shifting to that of a briefing officer. "The fortress is called Anvil Gate, one of the last major strongholds of the Coalition of Ordered Governments, or COG. The gray things you fought are what we call the Locust. They are a subterranean species that erupted from the ground 14 years ago, on a day we now call Emergence Day. They declared war on all of humanity, and for 14 years, they have been winning." She slid the data slate across the table towards him. On the screen, images began to flash. The first showed a city, vibrant and alive, gleaming towers under a blue sky. It was a world of beauty and progress. Then, the next image. The same city, but with the ground splitting open, massive holes gaping in the streets, and from those holes, a tide of monstrous creatures, the Locust, poured out, firing weapons. Overwhelming stunned and terrified civilians. There were images of the creatures he had fought, the drones, but also others. Larger, heavily armored boomers with grenade launchers. Small, shrieking tickers that skittered across the ground like explosive insects. And in the background of one horrifying image, a colossal beast that dwarfed buildings, a brumic. "They live in a network of tunnels under the surface of the entire planet, a place we call the Hollow," Anya continued, her voice tight with suppressed emotion. "They have driven us from our cities, destroyed our civilization, and slaughtered billions. We, the COG, are the last remnants of the organized human military. We fight for every inch of ground, for every life we can save. But we are losing. We are outnumbered, outgunned, and spread too thin. Naruto swiped through the images, his face impassive. He saw scenes of brutal, desperate warfare that mirrored his own experiences, yet were alien in their execution. He saw the faces of the soldiers. The fear, the exhaustion, the grim determination. It was the face of a species on the brink of extinction. "So you're the last line of defense," he summarized, pushing the slate back to her. "A fortress full of soldiers in a world of monsters." "That is a simplified, but accurate assessment," Anya confirmed. Suddenly, a harsh, gravelly voice erupted from a speaker in the ceiling. "Enough with the pleasantries, Lieutenant. Get to the point." A section of the wall to Naruto's left, which he had assumed was just concrete, flickered to life, becoming a large view screen. On it appeared the face of a man in his late 50s or early 60s. He had a weathered, deeply lined face, a formidable mustache, and the cold, hard eyes of a man who had sent thousands to their deaths and hadn't lost a night's sleep over it. He wore the uniform of a high-ranking officer, adorned with medals. "Acid," the man barked, his eyes narrowing. "I am Colonel Victor Hoffman. I am the commander of this fortress. And for all intents and purposes, your new warden. I've read the lieutenant's report. I've seen the footage. Regeneration. Impossible. I want to see it again. Now." Naruto glanced at the screen. Then back at Anya, a look of mild annoyance on his face. "He's not very polite, is he?" "The colonel is direct," Anya said, a slight flush on her cheeks. "He's a man who believes only what he sees with his own eyes." "Fine," Naruto sighed, standing up. "You want a show? I'll give you a show." He walked towards the one-way mirror. "I know there are two of you back there," he said, his voice calm. "One of you has a standard sidearm, a snub pistol, I believe it's called. The other has nothing. You, the one with the gun. Take it out. Shoot me. Center of the forehead would be the most dramatic, I think." Behind the mirror, two COG analysts stared at each other in shock. Anya's eyes widened. Hoffman, on the screen, leaned forward, his expression one of intense, predatory interest. "Do it, soldier," Hoffman commanded over the comm system connected to the observation room. There was a moment of hesitation, then the sound of a pistol being drawn. Naruto stood perfectly still, his back to the mirror. But he could sense the soldier's movements as if he were watching him. "This is insane," Anya whispered, her hands gripping the edge of the table. The shot was deafening in the confined space. The soldier, following orders, had fired. The bullet, however, did not come from behind the mirror. The soldier, his nerves shot, had refused to fire at Naruto's back. Instead, the soldier from Delta Squad, led Grunt, who had been guarding the door, burst into the room, his pistol drawn. "Colonel's orders," he yelled, and fired. The bullet struck Naruto squarely in the chest, right over his heart. The impact threw him back a step, and a dark, crimson flower bloomed on his tattered orange shirt. He looked down at the wound, a perfect, circular hole from which blood was now freely flowing. Then, he looked up at the shocked soldier, and then at Anya. He didn't fall. He didn't even grimace. He simply stood there as the impossible happened again. The bleeding stopped. The hole began to close. The flesh and muscle weaving itself back together with that sickening, silent speed. The golden glow of his chakra was faint, almost invisible under the harsh artificial lights, but Anya, watching intently, saw it. A brief, shimmering aura of pure energy. In seconds, the wound was gone. The bullet, pushed out by the regenerating tissue, fell from his shirt and clattered onto the floor. The only evidence that anything had happened was the new hole in his ragged shirt and the drying bloodstain. The room was silent, save for the hum of the lights. The soldier who had fired stood frozen, his pistol still smoking, his face pale with shock. On the screen, Hoffman's jaw was clenched, his eyes wide with a mixture of disbelief and avaricious glee. Naruto sighed, a sound of genuine disappointment. "You missed the forehead," he said, turning to face the soldier. "And you weren't even the one I was talking to." He then turned his gaze back to Anya. Satisfied, Anya swallowed hard, her mind struggling to reconcile what she had just seen with the fundamental laws of biology and physics. It wasn't possible. It simply wasn't. How? She breathed, the single word encompassing a universe of questions. "That's a long story," Naruto said, retaking his seat. He then did something that broke the tension, something that no one could have predicted. He focused for a second, making a subtle, one-handed sign under the table. You have a bit of a draft in here, by the way. A small, contained whirlwind, no bigger than a fist, suddenly manifested in the corner of the room, spinning with silent, controlled force. It picked up a few loose dust bunnies and a stray piece of paper, swirling them in a miniature vortex for a few seconds before dissipating into nothingness. It was a small, almost trivial display of power. But it was not regeneration. It was not a physical attribute. It was something else entirely. Control. Willpower made manifest. It was, for all intents and purposes, magic. The last vestiges of doubt in the room evaporated. This man was not just a biological anomaly. He was something other. Something that Sarah had never seen before. Hoffman's voice boomed from the speaker again. But his tone was different. The barking commander was gone, replaced by the calculating strategist. Asset. Naruto, you are a weapon. The greatest weapon this world has ever seen. And I want you. I'm not a weapon. Naruto corrected him calmly, his eyes still on Anya. I'm a shinobi, and I'm not for sale. I'm not talking about buying you, Hoffman clarified. I'm offering you a partnership. A purpose. You are in a strange, hostile world with no resources and no allies. We, the cog, can provide you with food, shelter, information. We can help you understand this world. In return, you help us. You fight with us. You use that gift of yours to help us push back the locust, to save the human race from extinction. It was the offer Naruto had been waiting for. It was a deal born of desperation on their part, and necessity on his. He needed them to survive, to learn. They needed him to have a chance, any chance at all. Anya watched him, her breath held. The fate of their world could very well rest on the answer of this impossible, sky-fallen man. She saw the calculation in his eyes, the weighing of options. He was not a simple man. He was a warrior, a survivor. And she was beginning to realize, a leader in his own right. There was a depth to him, a history of pain and power that she could only begin to guess at. And against all logic, against all her training, she felt a spark. Not of romance, not yet. But of profound, overwhelming fascination. He was the single most interesting thing to happen to her world in 14 years of grinding, hopeless war. Naruto leaned back in his chair. A slow, deliberate smile spreading across his face. It was a smile that held 1,000 secrets, a hint of ancient power, and a promise of storms to come. Colonel Hoffman, he said, his voice resonating with a newfound confidence, his gaze sweeping from the screen to Anya, and finally, to the mirror hiding the observers. You have a deal, but we do this on my terms. Chapter 2 End. Chapter 3. Echoes in the Hollow. The armory of Anvil Gate was a cathedral dedicated to the grim god of war. Its vaulted ceilings, lost in shadow far above, echoed with the rhythmic clang of metal on metal. The hiss of pneumatic tools, and the clipped, professional bark of quartermasters doling out munitions. The air tasted of gun oil and whetstones, a sacramental incense or the soldiers who moved through the cavernous space with a practiced, almost religious reverence. Racks upon racks of Lancer assault rifles stood in silent rows like steel pews, their integrated chaw. Insa bayonets gleaming dully under the harsh industrial lighting. It was a place where hope was measured in caliber and faith was placed in the reliability of a firing pin. Naruto stood in the center of this temple of violence. Feeling distinctly out of place. He wore his own repaired attire. The tattered orange and black jacket had been crudely stitched back together by a bemused logistics office. Who had stared at the fabric as if it were an alien artifact. He had refused their offer of body armor. It was, to his mind, redundant, encumbering, like offering a fish a raincoat. Across a scarred, metal table littered with schematics and data slates, Colonel Hoffman jabbed a thick finger at a holographic map projected between them. The map depicted a cross-section of the Earth, a complex network of COG-made tunnels and, deeper still, the ominous, uncharted blackness labeled simply, the Hollow. Here, Hoffman growled, his mustache twitching with irritation. Echo Station, a deep-range Lee 10ing post we established 6 months ago. Its purpose is to monitor seismic activity and locust communications traffic from the near Hollow. 3 days ago, it went silent. No check-in, no distress call. Just nothing. Anya Stroud stood beside the projector, her presence a pool of calm efficiency in the colonel's turbulent wake. Echo Station is fully automated for 90-day cycles, she elaborated, her voice crisp and clear. It has its own geothermal power source and redundant communication systems. For it to go completely dark suggests either a catastrophic systems failure or external interference. Locust, Hoffman grunted. Has to be. But the station is shielded, its heat signature masked. They shouldn't have been able to find it. We need to know what happened. We need the data from its logs, and if possible, we need the station brought back online. Naruto studied the hologram, his eyes tracing the thin, blue line that represented the subterranean transit tunnel leading to the station. His sensory abilities were already tingling, a faint, unpleasant hum in the back of his mind that seemed to emanate from the deeper parts of the map. You're sending a team in blind, into a potential kill zone. For a box of information. That box of information could give us insight into new locust movements, new threats, Hoffman retorted, his glare intensifying. In this war, information is more valuable than blood. This is your first official assignment, Naruto. A field test. You will escort Kilo Squad to Echo Station. You will assist them in securing the objective. And you'll follow the commands of the squad leader. Is that clear? Naruto's gaze shifted from the colonel to Anya. Her expression was neutral, but her eyes conveyed a silent message: play the game. For now, Crystal, Naruto replied, the single word dripping with a placid indifference that clearly grated on the colonel's nerves. Your escort is prepping now, Hoffman grumbled, switching off the hologram. Lieutenant Stroud will be your tactical liaison. Your eye in the sky, so to speak, though I suppose, eye in the ground, is more fitting for this particular shithole. He turned his back on them, a clear dismissal. Don't screw this up. As Hoffman stomped away, Anya stepped closer to Naruto. Kilo Squad is good, she said in a lower voice. Veteran gears. But they're wary of you. They've heard the rumors that I'm a freak who can't be killed. Naruto asked, a humorless smile touching his lips. The truth is often scary. Just try to work with them, she urged. Show them you're on their side. My side is the one that's not trying to kill me, he stated simply. As long as they stay on that side, we'll get along just fine. He turned and walked towards the designated staging area, leaving Anya to watch him go. A familiar knot of apprehension and fascination tightening in her stomach. He was a force of nature, and she and Hoffman had just pointed him at the enemy. She could pray the resulting storm wouldn't consume them all. Kilo Squad was a quartet of walking tanks, each member encased in the standard-issue COG armor that made them seem more machine than human. They were checking their weapons with the focused, ritualistic movements of soldiers who trusted their gear more than they trusted luck. The squad leader, a grizzled sergeant named Marcus Phoenix, was a Mo'Ntain of a man with a soul patch and a permanent scowl carved into his features. He merely grunted at Naruto's approach, his eyes offering a quick, dismissive appraisal before returning to the task of calibrating his lancer's sights. The other two males of the squad, Dominic, Dom, Santiago and Damon Baird, offered similarly lukewarm receptions. Dom, with his neatly trimmed beard and sad eyes, gave a hesitant nod, while Baird, a blonde technician with a perpetually sarcastic sneer, openly rolled his eyes. Great, Baird muttered to Dom, just loud enough for Naruto to hear. The brass sent us a pet monster. Try not to get any of his weirdness on you. The fourth member of the squad, however, was the most openly hostile. She was leaning against a stack of ammo crates, her helmet off, revealing a sweat-sheened face with sharp, intelligent features and a jaw set in a line of pure defiance. Her brown hair was cropped short in a no-nonsense military cut. This was Private Samantha, Sam, Byrne. Her gaze was sharp and accusatory. Her arms crossed tightly over her chest plate. So you're the big secret, she said, her voice laced with a thick, street-born cynicism. The sky-fallen demon. Heard you put on quite a show for the suits. Quote. Naruto stopped in front of her, unfazed by her aggressive posture. You can't believe everything you hear, he said calmly. I don't. Sam shot back, pushing herself off the crates to stand toe-to-toe with him. She was shorter than him, but she projected an energy that made up for the difference in height. I believe what I see. And right now, I see a guy with no armor, no weapon. And no goddamn business being on a deep hollow op. You're a liability. Another experiment for Hoffman to throw at the grubs until you break. I don't break, Naruto stated, not as a boast, but as a simple, undeniable fact. Sam let out a harsh, disbelieving laugh. Everybody breaks, Blondie. Everybody. Enough. Phoenix's voice cut in, low and commanding. He slammed a magazine into his lancer. Baird, you got the bypass kit. Dom, extra explosives. He looked at Naruto. You, stay behind me and try not to get killed. If you do, try to do it quietly. We don't have time for messes. Naruto simply nodded, his placid agreement seeming to unnerve them more than any argument would have. He was an outsider, a square peg being hammered into a round hole, and the friction was palpable. As they moved towards the deployment bay, he could feel their distrust, a heavy cloak of it settling over the squad. Sam's glare, in particular, felt like a physical weight on the back of his neck. This was not going to be easy. But then, nothing ever was. The descent was like being swallowed alive. The vehicle was not a helicopter, but a drill pod, a monstrous, screw-shaped submersible designed to bore through solid rock. Hilo Squad and Naruto were crammed into its cramped personnel compartment, a windowless steel tube that hummed and vibrated violently as the massive drills at its fore ground their way into the planet's crust. The only light came from a pair of flickering red emergency strips, casting their faces in a demonic glow. The air was stale and recycled, thick with the smell of sweat and nervous tension. The COG soldiers were silent, lost in their own pre-mission rituals. Phoenix stared at the floor, his face an unreadable mask. Dom nervously cleaned his knife. Aird fiddled with a handheld diagnostic tool, muttering curses under his breath. Sam sat directly across from Naruto, her rifle held across her lap, her knuckles white. She hadn't taken her eyes off him since they'd boarded. For Naruto, the physical discomfort was negligible, but the sensory input was overwhelming. As they plunged deeper, the world outside the hull changed. The faint, dead energy of the surface gave way to something else. A low, thrumming resonance that felt ancient and malevolent. It was the collective psychic residue of the locust horde, the echo of their rage, their hunger, their alien consciousness. It was a pressure against his mind, a constant, dull headache that made the hairs on his arms stand on end. Something's wrong, he said quietly, breaking the heavy silence. Baird scoffed without looking up from his device. No kidding, we're in a glorified coffin drilling our way to hell. What was your first clue? No, it's the rock, Naruto insisted, closing his eyes to focus. He could feel the vibrations through the hull, not just from the drill, but from the surrounding earth. There are cavities, tunnels, not on your schematics. They're all around us, like a honeycomb, and they're not empty. Sam snorted. He can talk to rocks now. Fantastic. Quiet, Phoenix commanded. He looked at Naruto, a flicker of grudging interest in his eyes. What do you feel? Movement, Naruto said, his brow furrowed in concentration. Faint, distant, but it's there. A skittering sound, like insects. Before anyone could mock him further, Anya's voice crackled through the comms system. Tinny and laced with static. Hilo, read me. We're picking up. I see anomalies on the geoscape, matches what the acid is describing. It seems the hollow is more extensive in this region than our maps indicate. Proceed with extreme caution. The squad exchanged uneasy glances. Baird looked up from his device, his sarcastic smirk gone. Sam's glare faltered for a fraction of a second, replaced by a flicker of uncertainty. Naruto had felt something that their multi-million-dollar technology was only just now confirming. He had, in fact, been listening to the rocks. The mood in the pod shifted from one of simple tension to one of prickling dread. They were not just traveling through inert rock. They were traveling through the enemy's home. The final hour of the descent passed in utter silence. The drill's grinding noise eventually ceased, replaced by a final, hydraulic hiss as the pod locked into the docking ring of Echo Station. The main hatch irised open, revealing not the brightly lit interior of an active COG facility, but a yawning blackness that seemed to swallow the light from their pod. Well, shit, Dom murmured, summing up the collective thought. All right, people, standard entry protocol. Phoenix ordered, his voice a low growl. Lancer lights on. Baird, you're on point with the scanner. Dom, watch our 6. Sam, you're with me. You, he pointed at Naruto, stay in the middle. Touch nothing. They stepped out of the pod into the oppressive silence of Echo Station. Their helmet-mounted lights cut sharp, narrow cones through the gloom, revealing a scene of controlled chaos. Papers were scattered across the floor, overturned chairs lay on their sides, and a single, forgotten coffee mug sat on a console, a thin layer of mold growing on its cold contents. The air was cold and damp, smelling of ozone from shorted-out electronics and a deeper, musky odor that was both animalistic and alien. No power. Baird stated the obvious, his motion scanner sweeping uselessly. Geothermal must be offline. No bodies, either. No blood, no spent casings. Whatever happened here, it wasn't a firefight. They moved deeper into the station, their heavy boots echoing unnervingly in the silence. It was a ghost station, a metal tomb buried miles beneath the surface. The tension was a physical thing, a tightening in their chests, a constant urge to look over their shoulders. Naruto moved with a grace that was completely at odds with the lumbering, heavily armored soldiers. His senses were screaming at him. The musky smell was stronger here. The feeling of being watched was undeniable. He noticed things the others missed. Long, deep scratches in the metal walls, high up near the ceiling. A strange, viscous slime dripping from a ventilation shaft, a substance that sizzled faintly when it hit the floor. Up, he whispered, his voice making them all jump. The ceiling. They all pointed their lights upwards. The ceiling was a complex network of pipes and conduits, 20 feet above them. At first, they saw nothing. Then Dom let out a choked gasp. Oh, my God. Clinging to the pipes like grotesque, leathery bats, were dozens of creatures. They were smaller than the drones Naruto had fought on the surface, with thin, spindly limbs and large, membranous wings folded against their backs. Their heads were dominated by a massive, disc-shaped ear, and their mouths were filled with rows of needle-like teeth. They were perfectly still, their mottled gray skin providing excellent camouflage against the metalwork. They had been watching them the entire time, as if on some silent command. One of them opened its mouth and emitted a high-pitched, piercing shriek that echoed through the station, a sound that felt like a needle being driven into their eardrums. In response, all of the creatures, the shriekers, detached from the ceiling and dove at them, a chittering, screeching avalanche of teeth and claws. Contact! Phoenix yelled, opening fire. E Station erupted into a cacophony of gunfire, screeching monsters, and shouting soldiers. The air was filled with muzzle flashes and tracer rounds, creating a hellish strobe effect that made the swarming creatures even more difficult to track. The COG soldiers formed a tight, back-to-back circle, a standard defensive formation. But the Shriekers were too fast, too numerous, and their attack from above negated the squad's conventional tactics. They swarmed and overwhelmed. One landed on Baird's back, its claws scraping uselessly against his armor as he roared in frustration, trying to shake it off. Dom managed to blast one out of the air, but two more immediately took its place, diving at him from opposite directions. Sam fought with a savage fury. She sidestepped a diving Shrieker and GHT'd it with the roaring teeth of her chainsaw bayonet, spraying a shower of black blood and gore across the floor. But as she finished the motion, another one latched onto her leg, its teeth sinking into the weaker armor plating around her calf. She cried out in pain, stumbling, and tried to bring her rifle around to shoot it. This was not a battle, it was an extermination. The gears were being systematically dismantled. Naruto had stood still for the first few seconds of the ambush, observing, analyzing. He saw the chaos, the failing tactics, the imminent fall of the squad. He saw Sam go down. Anya's voice was frantic in his ear, patched through a small comm device they had given him. Naruto, what's happening? I'm reading multiple contacts. Kilo, report, your soldiers are being overwhelmed. Naruto replied calmly into the comm, his voice a stark contrast to the surrounding chaos. Their formation is wrong. Their tactics are insufficient. It's time for a new approach. He made a single, familiar hand sign, the cross seal. Shadow clone jutsu. There was a series of soft puffs, completely lost in the din of battle, and suddenly, there were 10 of him. 10 identical, blonde-haired, figures fanning out from the center of the room. The members of Kilo Squad, in the midst of their desperate fight for survival, froze for a split second. Baird, having finally shaken the shrieker off his back, stared wide-eyed. What the actual fuck? He screamed over the gunfire. The Naruto clones didn't hesitate. They moved with a singular purpose, a coordinated, multi-pronged attack that was as beautiful as it was deadly. Two clones immediately sprinted towards Sam. One kicked the shrieker off her leg, while the other pulled her back into the relative safety of the forming perimeter. 3 more clones engaged the group swarming Dom, not with gunfire, but with swift, precise taijutsu, their fists and feet a blur of motion, shattering the creatures' fragile bones with every strike. The original Naruto moved towards the center of the room. He saw how the shriekers reacted to sound, how they flinched at the muzzle blasts. They were sonic hunters, wind style. Great breakthrough. He yelled. He didn't create a cutting gale. Instead, he exhaled a massive, concussive wave of air, a thunderclap without the thunder. The blast of pure kinetic force sent a dozen of the creatures tumbling through the air, disorienting them, crashing them into walls and consoles. The clones pressed the advantage. They flowed around the room like water, a perfect, synchronized storm of violence. They leapt onto consoles, ran along walls, and dropped from pipes, engaging the shriekers on their own terms, in their own three-dimensional battle space. They were everywhere at once, a whirlwind of orange and black that turned the tide of the battle in seconds. Sam, her leg bleeding from the puncture wounds, watched in stunned silence. She saw one Naruto get impaled by a diving shrieker, only to dissolve into a puff of smoke, the creature crashing stupidly into the floor. She saw another leap 20 feet into the air to tackle a shrieker on the ceiling. She saw the original, standing calmly amidst the chaos, directing his copies with subtle hand gestures, a conductor orchestrating a symphony of slaughter. He wasn't a liability. He wasn't a pet monster. He was an army. The remaining shriekers, their numbers decimated, their pack tactics broken, began to retreat, flying back up into the dark recesses of the ceiling. But Naruto wasn't finished. "They're trying to regroup," he said, more to himself than anyone else. He looked up, his eyes narrowing, piercing the gloom. He could sense it now, the source of the commands, the central intelligence directing the swarm. A larger, more powerful presence, deeper within the station. "The Queen is in the throne room." He pointed towards the main communications hub at the far end of the chamber. "That's where we'll find our answers." The members of Kilo Squad slowly picked themselves up, their armor scratched and dented, their bodies bruised. They looked at the carnage, the dozens of dead shriekers littering the floor, and then at Naruto and the in identical clones that now stood in a silent, disciplined circle around him. Baird's mouth opened and closed several times, but no sound came out. Dom just crossed himself. Phoenix walked over to Naruto, his expression one of grim, grudging respect. "I'm updating the mission parameters," the sergeant grunted. "From now on, you're not a liability. You're on point. Lead the way." Sam limped over, inking as she put weight on her injured leg. She stopped in front of Naruto, her earlier hostility completely gone, replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated disbelief and something else. "Ah. You're," she stammered, unable to find the words. One of the clones knelt, his hand glowing with a faint, green chakra. He placed it over the wound on her leg. The green energy pulsed, and Sam gasped as the pain vanished. The bleeding stopped, and the puncture wounds began to visibly close. It wasn't as fast or as absolute as Naruto's own regeneration, but it was undeniably, miraculously, healing. She stared at her leg, then back up at the real Naruto, her eyes wide. He simply gave her a small, reassuring nod. "The name's Naruto," he said, as if introducing himself for the first time. "And I don't break." The clones around him dissipated one by one in puffs of smoke, leaving only the original. He turned and started walking towards the communications hub, his back straight, his confidence absolute. Kilo Squad, after a moment's hesitation, fell into formation behind him. They were no longer his guards. They were his backup. Anya's voice, filled with a breathless wonder, came over his comm. "Naruto, what was that? My tactical display just lit up with a dozen of you. Just a little trick I know. he replied, a genuine smile finally reaching his face. He felt at home here, in the dark, in the danger. Leading a team against impossible odds. Now, let's go find out who's in charge of this little welcoming party. As they moved into the darkness of the next corridor, the silence that fell over the squad was no longer one of suspicion. It was the quiet, focused silence of soldiers who had just witnessed a miracle, and were now following it into the very heart of hell. Chapter 3 End. Chapter 4. The Queen and the Ronin. The silence that followed the slaughter was heavier than the rock above them. It was a weighted, watchful silence, broken only by the rhythmic drip of viscous slime from a ruptured pipe and the harsh, ragged breathing of Kilo Squad. The emergency lights of their armor painted the carnage in stark relief, the twisted, broken bodies of the shriekers, the dark SPLA. TTER of their ichor on the cold steel floors, the lingering scent of ozone and cooked meat. Naruto stood as the calm epicenter of the aftermath. He had led them through a storm and delivered them to the other side. And the change in the squad's demeanor was as tangible as the shift in barometric pressure before a typhoon. The suspicion was gone, replaced by a raw, shell-shocked respect. They no longer looked at him as an anomaly. They looked to him as their anchor. Anya, you read me. Phoenix's voice, a low rumble, was the first to break the quiet, his words directed to the comms but his eyes fixed on Naruto. Anya's voice returned. The static cleared, her tone tight with a mixture of professional focus and profound astonishment. I read you, Kilo. I saw everything. The tactical display is green. All hostiles eliminated. What was that, Naruto? A force multiplier. Naruto replied simply into his own comm device, his gaze already sweeping past the immediate carnage towards the far end of the station. The shriekers were just the welcoming party. The real host is still waiting. He started walking, his bare feet making no sound on the grimy floor. Kilo Squad, after a moment's shared glance, fell into step behind him. Their formation was different now. It was no longer a diamond meant to contain him. Phoenix and Dom flanked him, their lancers held at a low ready, while Baird and Sam brought up the rear. Their gazes constantly scanning the shadowed corners. They were a unit, moving with a singular purpose, and he was at its tip. The corridors leading to the central communications hub were a testament to a frantic, one-sided struggle. Deep gouges, thick as a man's arm, were carved into the reinforced walls. Heavy blast doors were bent and twisted, peeled open like tin cans. This wasn't the work of a swarm. This was the work of something with immense, brute strength. Sam moved up to walk beside Naruto, her earlier limp completely vanished. The faint green glow his medical jutsu had not just healed the wound, it had rejuvenated the muscle, leaving no trace of the injury. She could still feel a faint, pleasant warmth in her calf where his hand had been. That thing you did, she said. Her voice low, meant only for him. The healing. How? It's just chakra, he answered, his eyes never stopping their scan of the environment. A type of energy. I can use it to encourage the body's cells to replicate faster. Chakra. She repeated the alien word. So, you're a medic. A small, wry smile touched Naruto's lips. Sometimes. Other times, I'm the reason people need a medic. His simple, honest reply seemed to satisfy her more than any complex explanation would have. It was a glimpse into the duality of the man, a healer and a warrior, a creator and a destroyer. She found herself watching the way he moved, the effortless grace that was so at odds with his explosive power. He was a walking contradiction, and Sam Byrne had always been drawn to things she couldn't easily categorize. They reached the main communications hub. The circular chamber was vast, 2 stories high, with a ring of darkened consoles encircling a central holographic projector. The room was a disaster zone. Consoles were smashed into heaps of sparking circuitry, and data reels lay unspooled across the floor like metallic entrails. But in the center of the destruction, one terminal was different. It hadn't just been smashed, it had been altered. Thick, sinewy cables of organic material, pulsing with a faint, sickly bioluminescence, snaked out from the floor, bypassing ECOG wiring and plugging directly into the console's core processing unit. What in the hell? Baird breathed, stepping forward, his technical curiosity overriding his caution. He raised his diagnostic tool. They're interfacing, splicing their own biotech into our systems. It's like they're trying to hotwire the whole station. Wait, Naruto's voice was a sharp, sudden command. He held up a hand, and the entire squad froze. The oppressive silence of the room deepened. Naruto closed his eyes, his senses expanding, tasting the air. The musky, animal scent was overpowering here. He could feel it, a colossal life force, dormant but radiating a palpable aura of savage, primal rage. It was like standing next to a sleeping volcano. It can't see us, Naruto whispered, his voice a bare thread of sound. But its other senses are acute. It can hear us, smell us. Everyone, stop moving, stop breathing so loud. From the deepest shadows at the far edge of the chamber, something stirred. It was a slow, ponderous movement, accompanied by the grating sound of keratin scraping against steel. A figure emerged into the faint light, a figure that made the hulking drones on the surface look like children. It was nearly 12 feet tall, a bipedal monstrosity of thick, plated gray hide that looked more like living armor than skin. Its arms were massively overdeveloped, ending in claws that could shear through a tank's hull. Its head was a featureless cask of bone, with no visible eyes, only a grotesque, snarling mouth filled with serrated teeth. It sniffed the air, its entire upper body twitching, its head cocked as if listening to the vibrations in the floor. Anya's voice screamed over the comms, the professional calm shattered by pure, unadulterated panic. Berserker. Kilo, that's a berserker. Oh, God, abort mission now. Standard doctrine is Hammer of Dawn strike and tactical retreat. Get out of there. Negative. Control, Phoenix replied, his voice tight, but steady. He was already backing away, pulling Sam with him. We're miles underground. The hammer is useless. We're trapped. The berserker, having pinpointed their general direction from the scent and the frantic calm chatter, let out a deafening, earth-shaking roar. It was a sound of pure, mindless fury, a promise of violent, bloody death. And then it charged. It moved with a speed that defied its immense size. A blind avalanche of muscle and armored plating. It didn't swerve or dodge. It simply plowed through a bank of consoles that stood in its path, sending shrapnel and sparks flying across the room. Phoenix and Sam dove for cover, the beast missing them by inches. Naruto didn't move. He stood his ground, his eyes wide open, tracking the creature's path. He saw its every twitch, felt the displacement of air as it passed. It was blind, but its rage gave it a terrifying purpose. It's just a big, angry rock, Naruto said, his voice cutting through the ringing in their ears. He was taking command, his mind already dissecting the problem. It tracks by sound and smell. Baird, I need a distraction. Loud and far away. Dom, Sam, get to the perimeter. Phoenix, you're with me. We're going to play Matador. Baird, his face pale but his hand steady, grabbed a discarded lancer, ripped out its ammo counter, and smashed it against a console. The device's power cell shorted out, emitting a high-pitched, electronic squeal. He hurled it towards the far wall. The berserker, its eyeless face turning instantly towards the new sound, altered its course. It roared in frustration and charged towards the squealing device, slamming headfirst into the reinforced wall with a boom that shook the entire chamber. Now, hit its back, Naruto commanded. Kilo squad opened fire. A hail of bullets from 4 Lancer rifles converged on the berserker's broad back. The impacts were useless. The rounds sparked and whined, ricocheting off the thick, armored plating like pebbles off a fortress wall. No effect. Sam yelled, reloading. The armor's too thick. Anya's voice, regaining a sliver of composure, chimed in. Intelligence reports say the plating is thinner on its chest and underbelly. You have to lip it or knock it down to get a clean shot. Raw power wasn't the answer. Naruto's mind raced, sifting through a lifetime of impossible battles. He remembered his final fight with the third Raikage. A man whose body was an impenetrable shield. You couldn't break the shield. You had to bypass it. Or, in this case, crack it. New plan. Naruto yelled over the berserker's enraged roars as it pushed itself off the wall. We're not strong enough to break the armor, so we'll use gravity. Phoenix, look up. He pointed to a heavy maintenance scaffold, a platform of solid steel and machinery, suspended from the ceiling directly above the center of the room. You want to drop that on it? Phoenix asked. the sheer audacity of the plan dawning on him. "Dom, your explosives," Naruto ordered. "Can you rig those support struts?" Dom, who had been positioning fragmentation grenades, gave a grim nod. "It'll be tight, but I can do it. I'll need a distraction. A big one." "That's my part," Naruto said. AFL. Icker of a confident smirk returned to his face. He made a hand sign. Shadow clone jutsu. A single clone popped into existence beside him. The effect on the squad was immediate. They had seen it once, but to see it again, in the face of this new, more terrifying threat, was a profound reassurance. "All right, ugly," Naruto shouted, drawing the berserker's attention. "Come and get me." What followed was a deadly ballet. Naruto and his clone became blurs of orange and black, dancing around the lumbering behemoth. They were too fast, too agile for it to catch. They would slap the walls to create sound, then use their chakra-enhanced speed to be somewhere else entirely when the berserker charged. Sam and Phoenix provided support, firing short, controlled bursts not at the creature, but at the walls and floor around it, creating a symphony of distracting noises, hurting the blind monster with sound. While the deadly dance continued below, Dom and Baird scrambled up a service ladder. Baird, High's technical genius repurposed for demolition, helped Dom place the explosive charges on the primary support bolts of the hanging platform. The berserker was becoming more and more enraged. It was a force of nature, and it could not land a single blow. It swiped its massive claws through the air, smashing consoles and tearing deep gashes in the floor. During one pass, it misjudged Naruto's position and its backswing nearly caught him. The shadow clone, without a moment of hesitation, shoved the real Naruto clear, taking the full force of the blow itself. It dissolved into a harmless puff of smoke, but the sight of that casual, selfless sacrifice sent a chill down Sam's spine. He had created life, however temporary, and had it die for him without a second thought. "Charges are set," Dom yelled from above. "Get it in the kill zone." Quote, "On it," Naruto yelled back. This was the final, most dangerous part. He stopped dodging. He stopped being elusive. He ran in a straight line, right through the center of the room, directly under the rigged platform. He stomped his foot, a single, loud bang that cut through all the other noise. Hey, the berserker, its senses focusing on the single, defiant sound. The scent of the one who had been tormenting it the most, locked onto him. With a final, soul-shattering roar of pure hatred, it charged. Naruto stood his ground, his eyes locked on the approaching monstrosity. The floor shook. The distance closed in a heartbeat. 10 meters. 5. At the very last microsecond, as the creature's claws were descending, he channeled chakra to his feet and propelled himself backwards in a slide, clearing the kill zone just as the tons of enraged muscle and bone thundered into it. "Now, Baird," Phoenix screamed. Baird, already back on the ground, slammed his thumb down on the detonator. The explosions were not large, but they were precise. The bolts on the support struts sheared off with a series of sharp cracks. For a moment, the massive platform hung in the air, and then, with a groan of protesting metal, it fell. It crashed onto the berserker's back with the force of a meteor strike. The sound was a deafening cataclysm of shrieking, tearing metal, and the sickening crunch of chitinous armor. The berserker was slammed face first into the floor, its massive legs buckling under the immense, sudden weight. It wasn't dead, but it was down, pinned. Its armored hide visibly cracked and splintered along its spine and chest. "Its chest is exposed. Now's your chance, Kilo." Anya's voice was a triumphant cry. The squad raised their rifles, but Naruto was already moving. This was his kill. He leapt onto the twisted wreckage of the platform, his right hand already cupped, a swirling, violent sphere of pure blue chakra grinding into existence. The high-pitched, warbling shriek of the Rasengan was the only sound in the room. He didn't hesitate. He drove the spiraling sphere of death directly into the largest crack in the berserker's chest armor. The effect was absolute. The Rasengan did not explode. It drilled. It ground. It tore through the shattered plating and into the soft flesh beneath, pulverizing organs, bone, and sinew into a liquid spray. The berserker gave one final, full-body, agonized convulsion, a silent scream of oblivion, and then went utterly still. Silence. Profound and complete. It was broken only by the heavy panting of the four gears and the slow, whining dissipation of Naruto's Rasengan. Baird, shaking his head in disbelief, was the first to recover. Holy mother of, okay. He scrambled to the Locust-modified terminal. While he's playing giant killer, I'll just see what our squid-faced friends were so interested in. His fingers flew across the console, bypassing the alien tech. Oh, you have got to be kidding me. They weren't just smashing the place. They were downloading everything. COG tactical network schematics, weapon specs, troop deployments for the entire sector. They're not just monsters. They're spies. He jammed a data drive into a port. Got it. The station logs, and a copy of everything they downloaded. This is bad. This is really bad. Naruto stood on the corpse of his vanquished foe, but he felt no triumph. He looked down at the dead creature, its eyeless face somehow pathetic in its stillness. Sam walked up to the edge of the wreckage, her rifle lowered. What is it? She asked softly. We won. It was just a guard, Naruto said, his voice quiet, a distant, melancholic look in his eyes. A blind, rage-filled beast, lashing out at anything that entered its territory. He hopped off the platform. It reminds me of how I used to be. It was the most vulnerable, most personal thing he had ever said to them. Phoenix walked over and clapped a heavy, armored gauntlet on Naruto's shoulder. The gesture was firm, solid. A gesture of acceptance, of brotherhood. Doesn't matter what you used to be, kid, the grizzled sergeant said, a rare note of sincerity in his voice. Today, you were a gear. Now, let's get this data and get the hell out of this tomb. The journey back to the drill pod was transformed. The tension was gone, replaced by the easy, buzzing energy FA team that had faced death together and emerged victorious. They were no longer four soldiers and an anomaly. They were Kilo Squad, and Naruto was one of them. He was no longer the outsider. He was their point man, their trump card, their miracle. As the drill pod began its grinding ascent back to the surface, Anya Stroud watched the 5 distinct biosignatures on her tactical display. She let out a breath she didn't realize she had been holding for the last hour. Her hand rested over her heart, trying to calm its frantic beating. The data Baird had recovered was terrifying, a strategic GHT mare that would have repercussions for the entire war. But as she looked at the 5 green icons rising from the depths, one of them burning just a little brighter than the rest, she felt a flicker of something she hadn't felt in a very long time. Hope. Chapter 4 End. Chapter 5. The Weight of a Ghost. The ascent was a grinding, groaning reversal of their descent into hell. The drill pod, which had felt like a coffin on the way down, now felt like a chrysalis, carrying them back towards the pale, wounded sky. Inside the cramped compartment, the atmosphere had undergone a profound chemical change. The silence was no longer born of tension and suspicion, but of shared exhaustion and a new, unspoken camaraderie. Kilo Squad, who had descended as 4 gears and a volatile acid, were returning as a single, tempered unit. They sat in the dim, red emergency lighting, their armor scuffed and dented, their faces smudged with grime and the lingering shock of battle. Baird, for once, was silent. His diagnostic tool lying forgotten in his lap as he stared at the bulkhead, his mind clearly replaying the impossible events in the comms hub. Dom Santiago sat hunched over, his helmet in his hands. The deep-seated sadness in his eyes seeming, for the moment, to be held at bay by a quiet sense of accomplishment. Marcus Phoenix, the stoic core of the squad, met Naruto's gaze from across the pod and gave a slow, single nod. It was a gesture that spoke volumes, a concession of respect from a man who gave it sparingly. Naruto himself sat with his back against the vibrating wall, his eyes closed. He was not resting. He was processing. The oppressive psychic hum of the hollow receded with every foot they climbed, but its echo remained, a phantom limb of malevolent energy still tingling in his senses. He had fought blind, rage-filled beasts before. He had fought intelligent, fanatical organizations. The Locust, it seemed, were a horrifying synthesis of both. They had the raw, brutal power of a tailed beast and the cunning, strategic intelligence of the Akatsuki. The revelation from Baird's data download, the sheer scope of their espionage, had chilled him more than the Berserker's charge. It was not a war against simple monsters. This was a war against a rival civilization, one that was methodical, patient, and utterly ruthless. The final jolt of the drill pod docking with the Anvil Te deployment bay was a jarring transition back to their reality. The main hatch irised open, flooding the red-lit interior with the harsh, white glare of the hangar. The air that flowed in, sterile and smelling of ozone, had never felt so fresh. As they stepped out, a team of medics and deckhands rushed forward, but they stopped short, their practiced urgency faltering. They were staring at the squad, and then at Naruto, who stood among them, not behind them or apart from them, but with them. The rumors of Kilo's disastrous mission had likely already spread through the base's gossip mill. To see them return, not just alive, but whole, with the strange, unarmored outsider looking completely unfazed, sent a ripple of shock and awe through the hangar. Colonel Hoffman was waiting for them, his arms crossed over his barrel chest. His expression as unyielding as the mountain fortress itself. He wasn't flanked by guards, but by two intelligence officers clutching data slates. "Kilo Squad," he barked, his eyes immediately locking onto Phoenix. "Report." Phoenix stepped forward, his helmet tucked under his arm. "Objective secured, Colonel. We retrieved the station logs." He glanced at Baird. Baird, jolted from his stupor, stepped up and handed a data drive to one of the waiting officers. "They were waiting for us, sir. A new breed of shrieker and a berserker. The station was compromised. They were using it as a tap. Downloading our entire tactical grid for this sector." Hoffman's eyes narrowed, his mustache twitching. "A berserker." The lieutenant's preliminary report mentioned extreme resistance. She failed to mention specifics. His gaze slid past Phoenix, landing on Naruto with the weight of a physical object. "Your pet asset performed as expected, then." The question hung in the air. A deliberate attempt to separate Naruto from the rest, to reassert the hierarchy of soldier and weapon. It was Sam Byrne who answered, her voice ringing with a newfound, defiant confidence. "He's not a pet, Colonel. And his name is Naruto. He's the only reason we're not berserker food right now. He's Kilo." The statement was a gauntlet thrown at the Colonel's feet. It was a declaration of loyalty, a redrawing of the lines. Hoffman's eyes tightened, a flash of annoyance crossing his features. He had given them a tool, and they had adopted it into their pack. This complicated things. Our new squadmate's performance has been noted, Private, Hoffman said, his tone dismissive. He turned his attention back to the intelligence officers. "I want that data analyzed. Top priority. I want to know what the grubs know. Kilo, you're debriefed. Hit the mess, then get some rack time. You've earned it." He turned and strode away without another word, the intelligence officers scurrying in his wake. The message was clear. The data was important, the soldiers were replaceable, and Naruto was a problem to be solved later. "Charming as ever," Baird muttered, though the sarcasm lacked its usual bite. "Come on," Phoenix said, clapping a hand on Dom's shoulder. "Let's get some grub. I could eat a corpser." The squad began to move off, but Sam hung back for a moment. She walked up to Naruto, her expression serious. "Hey, thanks. For, the leg. And for not letting us die. It was a team effort," Naruto said, deflecting the praise. "You fought well." "Yeah, well, we fight. You do something else entirely," she said with a small, wry smile. The open hostility she had shown him hours ago had been replaced by a deep, genuine curiosity. The warrior in her respected the power, the woman in her was intrigued by the quiet man who wielded it. "See you in the mess, Blondie." She turned and jogged to catch up with the others, leaving Naruto alone for a moment in the bustling hangar. He watched them go, a strange, unfamiliar warmth spreading through his chest. Kilo. For the first time since he had been ripped from his world, he felt a sense of belonging, a connection to the people around him. It was a pale shadow of the bonds he had shared with Team 7 or the Konoha 11, but it was real. And it was a start. "He's not wrong, Naruto turned. Anya Stroud stood a few feet away, her arms crossed. Her officer's tunic immaculate despite the hours she had clearly spent glued to a comms station. Her usual professional mask was slightly askew, her clear blue eyes holding a look of profound, analytical wonder. "Hoffman," she clarified, "he sees you as a weapon. A silver bullet for a war that has no easy answers." It's his nature. He's been fighting this war for so long. He's forgotten how to see people as anything other than assets or casualties. And what do you see, Lieutenant? Naruto asked, his voice low. I see a paradox, she answered honestly, stepping closer. Come with me. I need your perspective for my own report. Somewhere less formal. She led him away from the noise of the hangar, through a series of quieter, higher-level corridors, to a place he hadn't known existed. It was an observation deck, a hemispherical room with a floor-to-ceiling armored glass window that offered a breathtaking, panoramic view of the world outside Anvil Gate. The landscape was a study in monochromatic sorrow. Jagged gray peaks clawed at a bruised purple sky, and the wind, a constant, mournful sigh, whipped clouds of fine, corrosive dust across the plains below. In the sky, Sarah's broken moon hung like a shattered pearl, its fractured pieces casting a faint, ghostly light. It was a vista of profound, heartbreaking beauty, the majestic corpse of a world. Naruto walked to the window, placing a hand on the cold surface of the glass. He felt like he could finally breathe. After the crushing, claustrophobic darkness of the hollow, the sight of an open sky, however bleak, was a balm to his soul. I've never seen a sky so tired, he said quietly. It's all we've ever known, for my generation, Anya said, coming to stand beside him. I was a child when the sky was still blue. Sometimes, I think I just imagined it. She held out a data slate. I want to understand what you did down there. The shadow clones. Hoffman's report will just say, unexplained tactical advantage. I need to know more. Are they illusions? Solid constructs? Did they think independently? Thus began their own debriefing, a conversation that was less a military report and more a meeting of two keen, analytical minds from different universes. Naruto, choosing his words carefully, explained the basics of the clone jutsu, framing it in concepts of energy and matter that her scientific mind could grasp. He spoke of chakra not as magic, but as a biological energy source that could be manipulated by a trained will. Anya listened, rapt, her fingers flying across the data slate as she took notes. She was not just hearing his words, she was analyzing them, cross-referencing them against the laws of physics, searching for the logic within the miracle. He was drawn to her intelligence, the quick, sharp way her mind worked. She was drawn to his perspective, an outside view that was untainted by 14 years of ingrained cog doctrine and despair. This changes everything, she murmured, looking up from her slate, her eyes shining with intellectual excitement. Logistics, force deployment, infiltration, a single soldier who can be a squad, a scout who can be in multiple places at once. The strategic implications are staggering. It's just a tool, Naruto said, turning his gaze back to the shattered moon. The real question is how you use it. You said the Locust were downloading your tactical data. That means they're not just fighting a war of attrition. They're planning something. They're looking for a weakness. Their conversation shifted from his abilities to the nature of their enemy. They spoke of strategy, of psychology, of the difficult choices leaders must make in wartime. He spoke of battles won not by strength, but by deception. She spoke of the brutal calculus of acceptable losses. In that high, quiet room, overlooking a dying world, they found a startling and unexpected common ground. They were both soldiers, both strategists, and both, in their own way, lonely. Later, Naruto found Kilo's squad in the mess hall. The vast, utilitarian room was packed with off-duty gears, the air thick with the smell of protein paste and the loud, boisterous chatter of soldiers blowing off steam. As Naruto entered, a hush fell over the tables nearest the door. Soldiers stopped eating, their eyes following him. They weren't just looking at the outsider anymore. They were looking at the man who had walked into the hollow with Kilo's squad and brought them all back. He spotted them at a corner table. Baird was already arguing with a supply officer over a faulty power conduit. Phoenix was methodically consuming a plate of grayish mush. But Dom and Sam were not with them. Looking for Dom, Sam's voice came from behind him. He turned. She was holding 2 trays. He's not much for crowds after a rough op. Come on. She led him away from the main hall, down a quiet, little-used service corridor, to a small, forgotten communications nook. The room was dark, filled with racks of obsolete radio equipment. In the center, sitting on an overturned crate, was Dominic Santiago. He was holding a set of oversized headphones to his ears, his eyes closed, his face a mask of profound, soul-deep concentration. In front of him, an old, reel-to-reel tape machine spun, emitting a soft, constant hiss of static. "What is he doing?" Naruto asked softly. Sam's USU. Ally's sharp features softened with a deep, sorrowful empathy. She set the food trays down. "He's listening," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "To the ghosts." She went on to tell him the story. The story of Emergence Day. The story of Dom's wife, Maria. They had 2 children. When the locust came, they were separated in the chaos. The children, they didn't make it. But Maria survived. For years, Dom held on to the hope of finding her. He searched ruins, followed leads, listened to every scattered radio broadcast, hoping to hear her voice. He eventually found her, a prisoner of the locust in the hollow. But the woman he rescued was a shell, her mind and spirit utterly broken by years of torture and starvation. She didn't even recognize him. Faced with an impossible choice, Dom had ended her suffering. It was an act of love, an act of mercy, that had shattered him to his core. He lost everything, Sam concluded, her voice thick with emotion. But he can't let her go. So he comes here. He listens to the old broadcasts from before he found her. He searches the static for her voice, for a time when she was still whole. It's all he has left. Naruto looked at Dom, and for the first time, he used his sensory abilities not to detect a threat, but to feel a soul. The grief radiating from the man was a physical presence in the room, a cold, heavy blanket of despair that was suffocating. It was a wound far deeper than any berserker could inflict, a wound that no medical jutsu could ever hope to heal. He knew that wound. He had carried it himself for years, the loneliness of the orphan. The pain of losing his master, the burden of a world's hatred. He walked forward slowly, not wanting to startle the grieving man. He didn't offer empty platitudes or words of comfort. He knew they would be useless. Instead, he sat down on the floor next to the crate, leaned his back against a rack of cold metal, and simply sat. He closed his eyes and extended his chakra in the most delicate, subtle way imaginable. He didn't try to heal. He simply connected with the chaotic energy of the radio waves, filtering the noise, gently entangling the threads of sound, sharpening the faint, buried signals within the wall of static. Dom, his eyes still closed, frowned. The hiss in his ears lessened, and beneath it, something became clearer. A faint scrap of music. A fragment of a news report from a world that no longer existed. And then, a voice. A woman's laugh, faint and distant, caught in a stray broadcast from 15 years ago. It was just a ghost, an echo in the machine, but for a fleeting moment. It was clear as a bell. A single tear traced a path through the grime on Dom's cheek. He didn't open his eyes. He didn't speak, but his shoulders, which had been hunched in a permanent state of tension, relaxed by a fraction of an inch. Sam watched from the doorway, her heart aching for her friend, and her eyes wide with a new understanding of the man sitting beside him. Naruto hadn't offered a cure. He had offered a moment of clarity. He had shared the burden of the silence, and in doing so, had made it more bearable. It was an act of profound, quiet empathy that was more powerful than any Rasengan. Much later, Naruto found himself back on the observation deck. The shattered moon was higher in the sky now, its ghostly light illuminating the desolation. He had eaten, he had rested, but he could not sleep. Dom's grief had stirred up his own ghosts, the faces and voices of the people he had lost. Jiraiya, Nagato, his parents. In his own world, he had been surrounded by their legacy. By the village they had died to protect. Here, he was utterly alone, the last remnant of a world that might as well have never existed. The feeling of being stranded had never been so acute, so piercing. It was a cold, hollow ache in the center of his soul. He was the last shinobi, a god of resilience in a world of ghosts. He felt a presence behind him, the same calm, intelligent energy he was beginning to recognize instantly. "I couldn't sleep either," Anya said softly, coming to stand beside him at the window. She was no longer in her uniform, but in a simple, gray cog issue jumpsuit, and her hair was down, falling softly around her shoulders. In the dim light of the broken moon, she looked younger, more vulnerable. "Too much to think about," he said, his voice quiet. I analyzed the data from Echo Station, she said, her gaze on the horizon. The Locust weren't just downloading our data. They were uploading something. A single, heavily encrypted data packet, sent to a location deep within the hollow. Deeper than our drills can reach. A report to their masters, Naruto surmised. They know about me. They know something arrived, Anya corrected. And now it annihilated their patrols and killed a berserker. You are now a factor in their war. A variable they will be desperate to understand, or eliminate. They stood in comfortable silence for a long moment. Two lonely figures staring out at a broken world, each carrying their own burdens. The strategic implications were vast, the danger immense. But in that quiet moment, the shared weight felt just a little bit lighter. The Ronin and the lieutenant, two souls adrift in a sea of war, had found a temporary harbor in each other's company. Chapter 5 End. Chapter 6. The Crucible and the Cog. The air in the crucible hummed. It was a low, resonant frequency that vibrated in the bones, the sound of immense power held in check. Unlike the grimy, functional armory or the stark interrogation room, his chamber was a masterpiece of sterile, brutalist architecture. The floor was a single, seamless slab of polished black obsidian, reflecting the cold, white light from recessed ceiling panels. The walls were a dull, non-reflective gray, designed to absorb energy and betray no secrets. This was not a training room, it was a laboratory, and the subject was about to arrive. Behind a transparent, floor-to-ceiling wall of what looked like reinforced diamond, Colonel Hoffman stood with his arms crossed, his expression a mask of grim anticipation. Beside him, Anya Stroud held a data slate, her face professional but her knuckles white where she gripped the device. They were not alone. A third figure stood with them, a man who seemed utterly at odds with the military precision of Anvil Gate. He was tall and thin, with a shock of unruly gray hair that suggested a long-standing feud with Combs. He wore a pristine white lab coat over a cog scientist's jumpsuit, and a pair of wire-rimmed spectacles were perched on his long, aquiline nose. This was Dr. Aris Thorne, head of Anvil Gate's Research and Development Division. He peered through the diamond-like wall with the detached, analytical curiosity of an entomologist about to dissect a rare beetle. The biotelemetry sensors are calibrated, Colonel Thorne said, his voice dry and precise, like old parchment. We will be able to monitor his heart rate, bioelectric output, and cellular regeneration rate in real time. This is, from a purely biological standpoint, the most significant discovery since the mapping of the human genome. Perhaps more so. I don't care about his genome, Dr. Hoffman grunted, his gaze fixed on the heavy blast door on the far side of the chamber. I care about his applications. I need to know his limits, his speed, his strength, the upper threshold of his jutsu, as he calls it. And most importantly, I need to confirm the parameters of his regenerative capabilities. I need to know what it takes to put him down, even if it's only for a minute. Anya felt a knot of ethical unease tighten in her stomach. Colonel, he agreed to a demonstration, not a vivisection. Pushing him too far could be counterproductive. Every gear is pushed to their limit, Lieutenant, Hoffman retorted without looking at her. It's how we find out what they're made of. He is no different. The blast door hissed open, and Naruto walked into the crucible. He was dressed in his now clean orange and black attire, the vibrant colors a stark, living contrast to the monochrome sterility of the chamber. He paused in the center of the room, his gaze sweeping across the empty space, noting the almost invisible seams of hidden turrets, the faint outline of pressure plates in the floor, and the thick, armored wall behind which the three observers stood. He could feel their eyes on him, a mixture of military appraisal, scientific curiosity, and Anya's quiet apprehension. A speaker crackled to life. Naruto, Hoffman's voice boomed into the chamber. Welcome to the Crucible. Today, we're going to establish a baseline for your combat effectiveness. A series of controlled tests. Consider it your formal induction into the cog. Naruto just tilted his head. A silent, almost amused acknowledgement. He was being tested, judged like a new piece of hardware. It was predictable, and, in a way, necessary. They needed to understand him. And he needed them to understand what they were dealing with. Test 1. Speed and reflexes, Hoffman announced. The objective is simple. Cross the room. Do not get hit. As he spoke, sections of the walls and floor slid away with silent, hydraulic precision, revealing a dozen automated sentry turrets. Simultaneously, a complex grid of crimson laser beams filled the space between Naruto and the far wall. Doctor. Thorn leaned closer to the transparent wall, his eyes gleaming. Standard Onyx Guard Training Regimen, Enhanced. The turrets fire non-lethal stun rounds with a velocity of 900 meters per second. The laser grid is Class 4. Contact results in severe, third-degree burns. No human has ever completed this simulation above a 60% difficulty setting. We have it at 100%. Begin, Hoffman commanded. The turrets swiveled, their optical sensors locking onto Naruto. The first one fired. Naruto moved. He didn't just run, he flowed. The high-velocity stun round hiss D through the space where his head had been a fraction of a second before. He was already in motion, a blur of orange that weaved through the first layer of the laser grid with impossible grace. He didn't break the beams. He moved between them, his body contorting in ways that seemed to defy skeletal structure. A twist here, a duck there, a fluid leap that saw him plant his feet on the side of a 2RRET for a split second before launching himself sideways. The turrets fired in a coordinated, overlapping fusillade. Their targeting computers were designed to predict and intercept a moving target. But they couldn't predict a target that moved with three-dimensional, almost precognitive, intuition. He ran along a wall for 3 steps to avoid a volley, then backflipped through a closing gap in the laser grid. He was not just dodging. He was dancing, a silent, deadly ballet set to the music of whizzing stun rounds and the hum of energy beams. From the observation room, it was surreal. Anya watched, breathless, as his biotelemetry readings on her slate remained almost placid. His heart rate was barely elevated. He was not straining, he was playing. He reached the far wall in 6 seconds. He didn't touch a single laser. And not a single stun round had grazed him. He stopped, turned, and looked back at the observation window, a placid, almost bored expression on his face. Doctor. Thorn pushed his glasses up his nose. His mouth slightly agape. Impossible, he whispered. His spatial awareness, his proprioception, it's not human. He's processing sensory input and executing complex motor functions faster than our computers can track him. Hoffman just grunted, a flicker of something that might have been satisfaction in his eyes. Test 2. Destructive capability. Send in the guest. A section of the floor opposite Naruto slid open, and a heavy cage was lifted into the crucible. Inside, hunched and snarling, was a locust boomer. It was a hulking brute, even larger than the drones, its thick, leathery hide covered in scars. Its weapon, a massive grenade launcher known as a boomshot, was magnetically clamped to the cage wall. The objective, Hoffman's voice announced, is to neutralize a heavily armored target. The boomer's hide is resistant to small arms fire. Its strength is sufficient to tear through steel plating. Let's see how your jutsu stacks up. The cage door hissed open. The boomer roared, boom. A guttural, single-word war cry, and snatched its weapon. It took aim, the twin barrels of the boomshot gaping at Naruto. Naruto didn't wait. He blurred forward, losing half the distance of the room in an instant. The boomer, surprised by his speed, fired. The rocket-propelled grenade screamed across the chamber. Naruto didn't dodge. He leapt. He ran straight up the wall, using his chakra to adhere to the surface, and sprinted along the ceiling, upside down, as the grenade exploded harmlessly against the far wall, shaking the entire chamber. While still on the ceiling, he pushed off, twisting in midair, and descended on the boomer like a hawk on a tortoise. His right hand was already a vortex of swirling blue energy, the high-pitched shriek of the Rasengan cutting through the air. The boomer looked up, its slow-witted brain just registering the descending threat. It tried to raise its weapon, but it was too late. Naruto slammed the Rasengan into the top of the boomer's head. There was no explosion. There was only a grinding, visceral sound of annihilation. The spiraling chakra bored through the boomer's thick skull and dense muscle as if it were wet paper, vaporizing everything in its path. The creature's roar was cut short, its heavy body convulsing once before collapsing, its upper torso and head simply gone. It fell to the floor with a wet, heavy thud. Naruto landed softly beside the corpse, the Rasengan dissipating from his hand. He looked at the remains, then up at the observation window. The whole confrontation had lasted less time than the first test. This time, drive. Thorn was speechless. He just stared, adjusting his glasses repeatedly as if they were malfunctioning. Anya felt a chill run down her spine. The raw, focused lethality was terrifying. It was one thing to see it on a grainy tactical feed from the holo. It was another thing to witness it up close. Hoffman, however, smiled. It was a cold, predatory smile. Excellent. Now for the final test. The one that truly matters. A new speaker, this one directly in front of the observation wall, crackled to life. It was Anya's voice, calm and professional, likely a recording. Test 3. Regeneration Threshold Analysis. Acid will be subjected to controlled, escalating damage to determine the limits of his restorative abilities. Naruto's placid expression vanished. It was replaced by a sudden, dangerous stillness. His blue eyes, which had been calm and observant, turned to chips of ice. Heavy caliber rounds will be fired first, targeting extremities, then center mass. Anya's recorded voice continued. This will be followed by plasma-based energy weaponry and, if necessary, concentrated acid exposure. From the ceiling, a heavy-barreled machine gun descended on an automated mount. Its muzzle aimed directly at Naruto's chest. Begin, Hoffman commanded. The gun did not fire. Naruto stood perfectly still, his gaze locked on the observation window. His voice, when he spoke, was dangerously quiet, yet it carried through the chamber with absolute clarity. No, Hoffman's smile faded. That was an order, asset. I am not your asset, Naruto said, his voice dropping an octave. A palpable pressure filled the room, a wave of pure, condensed chakra that made the air feel thick and heavy. The lights in the crucible flickered. On Anya's slate, his bioelectric output spiked off the chart. I am a shinobi of the leaf, and I am your ally. I am not your lab rat. You want to see me heal? Fine. He held up his left hand. With his right, he created a small, incredibly sharp blade of pure wind chakra. It hummed in the air, a miniature scalpel of invisible force. You will not test my limits, Colonel, Naruto stated, his eyes boring into Hoffman's. Because you cannot comprehend them. Before anyone could react, he drew the wind blade across his own forearm. The cut was deep, clean, and instant. It severed muscle, tendon, and artery. Blood, shockingly red against his tanned skin, welled up and began to pour onto the pristine black floor. In the observation room, Anya gasped. Thorn leaned forward, his eyes wide with morbid fascination. Then, the miracle. The golden glow of his healing factor flared to life, visible even under the harsh lights. The severed tissues knitted themselves together. The bleeding stopped. The skin flowed over the wound like water. And in 3 seconds, his arm was perfectly whole, the only evidence of the injury the blood that now stained his skin and the floor. He then looked at his other hand, the one holding the wind blade. This is a tool. It can be used to harm, he said, the blade dissipating into nothing. He then held up the hand he had just healed. And this is a tool. It can be used to mend. He made a single hand sign. With a soft poof, a shadow clone appeared beside him. The clone walked over to the corpse of the boomer. It knelt, placing its hands on the pulped mess. A gentle, green chakra enveloped its hands. It couldn't bring the creature back. The damage was far too absolute, but the gesture was clear. The same power, in a different form. Power is a choice, Colonel, the real Naruto said, his voice resonating with an authority that dwarfed Hoffman's. I have made mine. This test is over. He turned his back on them and walked towards the exit, his clone dissipating as he went. The heavy blast door, which should have been locked, hissed open before him as if bowing to his will. In reality, it was Anya, her fingers flying across a control panel on her slate, overriding the lockdown. Her eyes met Naruto's for a brief second as he left, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. Hoffman stood in stunned silence, his face a thunderous mask of fury and, beneath it, a sliver of fear. He had tried to put a leash on a god, and the god had just calmly, and absolutely, refused the collar. The news of what happened in the crucible spread through Anvil Gate like wildfire. By the time Naruto entered the mess hall an hour later, the atmosphere was electric. He was no longer just a rumor or a hero of the holo. He was a legend. The man who had broken every record, destroyed a boomer in seconds, and stared down Colonel Hoffman himself. Kilo Squad was at their usual table. As Naruto approached, Baird looked up from a data slate he was tinkering with. "Heard you put on a show for the eggheads," the technician said, his voice lacking its usual sarcastic edge. It was replaced by something that sounded almost like professional respect. "Thorn's telemetry data must look like a seismograph during an earthquake. I'd love to get my hands on that." Phoenix just pushed a tray of protein paste towards him. "Chow down. You earned it." It was his version of a compliment. As Naruto sat, a new figure approached their table. She was a woman he hadn't seen before, dressed not in a uniform or a lab coat, but in worn, practical civilian clothing, cargo pants and a faded flak jacket over a plain shirt. She had sharp, intelligent brown eyes that seemed to miss nothing and a mane of dark, curly hair tied back with a leather strap. She carried a battered-looking data slate and had a disarming, confident smile. "Excuse me," she said, her voice smooth and inquisitive. "You're Naruto, right? I'm Alara Vance. And you are?" Sam asked, her tone instantly protective, sizing up the newcomer. "War correspondent," Alara answered easily, her smile not faltering. "I'm embedded with the COG, covering the human element of the war." Her focus, however, was entirely on Naruto. "I've been hearing extraordinary things. They're calling you the Ghost of Anvil Gate. I was hoping I could get your perspective. Not the official COG report, but your personal experience. A man who fell LS from the sky into the middle of a war, that's a story that needs to be told." Her approach was direct, yet charming. She wasn't asking about his powers or his mission. She was asking about him. It was a refreshing change. Naruto, caught off guard by her candor, found himself intrigued. Before he could answer, however, another presence made itself known. Anya Stroud walked up to the table, her officer's composure fully restored. She held a data slate, but this one bore the crimson seal of classified intelligence. She ignored everyone else, her eyes locked on Naruto. "We need to talk," she said, her voice low and urgent. "The data from Echo Station. We broke the final layer of encryption on the packet the Locust uploaded." The table went quiet. Alara Vance took a half step back, her journalistic instincts sensing the sudden shift in gravity. "It wasn't just a report on you," Anya continued, her voice barely a whisper. "It was a query. They sent your bio-signature and a recording of your fight with the Berserker to their high command, cross-referencing it against their own databases. And they got a hit." "A hit?" Phoenix asked, leaning forward. "How is that possible? He's not from Sarah." "Because what they found wasn't Locust," Anya said, her gaze unwavering on Naruto. "It was an old COG designation. A black site project from before Emergence Day. A place that officially doesn't exist." She turned the data slate so only Naruto could see it. On the screen was a single file name, a ghost from a past that was not his own, but one that was now inextricably linked to his future. Project Chimera, Chapter 6 End. Chapter 7. Ghosts of the Old COG. The air in the mess hall, thick with the smell of scorched protein and the boisterous energy of off-duty gears, suddenly went thin and cold. The revelation Anya had delivered landed on Kilo's table with the weight of a dropped bombshell, silencing Baird's tinkering and wiping the nascent smile from Sam's face. Project Chimera. The name was alien, yet the context was terrifying. A COG black site. Phoenix's voice was a low growl, his eyes narrowed on Anya. "Impossible. His signature can't match something from our past." "The Locust seemed to think it can," Anya countered. Her gaze fixed on Naruto. The professional calm in her eyes was a thin sheet of ice over a deep, turbulent ocean of questions. Their query was specific. "They TCHED the unique energy signature of your chakra, with data they already possessed. Data they must have acquired before Emergence Day. Before anyone could process the terrifying implications of the Locust having pre-war intelligence." The gravity in the room shifted again. Colonel Hoffman, flanked by two stone-faced onyx guards, strode towards their table, his boots echoing on the steel deck with grim purpose. He had clearly been alerted the instant Anya had accessed the classified file. "Lieutenant Stroud," he barked, his eyes sweeping over the assembled group with open contempt. "You have a CCS to file far above your clearance level. That data slate is now classified evidence in an internal investigation. One of the Onyx guards stepped forward to confiscate the slate, but Anya held it protectively. With all due respect, Colonel, Anya said, her voice steady despite the commander's intimidating presence, the asset's unique biology is directly linked to this file. It is a matter of immediate tactical importance. It is a matter for the High Command, not a table-side chat in the mess, Hoffman sneered. He turned his glare on Naruto. As for you, asset, whatever this is, it is a cog matter. You will be confined to your quarters until we determine what this security breach means. No, Naruto said. The word was not loud, but it cut through Hoffman's tirade with the finality of a closing vault door. He rose slowly from his seat, his presence seeming to suck the very sound from the immediate area. The surrounding tables had fallen silent, all eyes locked on the unfolding drama. This involves me, my signature, as you call it. That makes it my business. I'm not being confined anywhere. The two Onyx guards instinctively tensed, their hands moving towards their sidearms. Phoenix and the rest of Kilo's squad subtly shifted, their own postures becoming coiled springs, ready to move. The air crackled with the promise of violence. Alara Vance, the journalist, had taken several steps back, her eyes wide. Her hand clutching her own data slate, which was undoubtedly recording the entire exchange. She was witnessing the fault lines of power in Anvil Gate shifting in real time. Hoffman stared at Naruto, a vein pulsing in his temple. He saw the defiance in Naruto's eyes, the unwavering loyalty in Kilo's stance, and the resolute support in Anya's expression. He was a commander who understood control, and he could see it slipping through his fingers. Forcing the issue here, in a public space, would be a catastrophic mistake. This conversation is over, Hoffman snarled, making a tactical retreat. Lieutenant, you will report to my office in 1 hour. Kilo, you are on lockdown. No missions, no requisitions, no leaving this base. He spun on his heel and marched away, the Onyx guards following like grim shadows. The lockdown was a leash, and he had just clipped it to all of them. As the tension dissipated, Alara moved back towards the table. Project Chimera, she murmured, her journalistic instincts overriding any sense of self-preservation. I've heard whispers of that. Pre-E-Day ghost stories. A place where the cog played God. If you're going after this, it's the story of a lifetime. I can help. I have contacts, resources. This is a closed Kilo op. Sam cut in, her tone leaving no room for argument. No reporters. Alara met her gaze, unfazed. When the colonel locks you in a box, you'll find that a friend on the outside is more valuable than a gun on the inside, she said, her eyes shifting to Naruto. My offer stands. She gave a small nod and melted back into the mess hall crowd. A ghost of her own. She's not wrong, Baird muttered, already pulling up schematics on his personal slate. Hoffman's put a digital wall around us. I can't even requisition a damn spanner without his direct approval. All transport is flagged. Then we go around the wall, Phoenix said, his gaze turning to Anya. What do we know? In a secure communications room. A place shielded against all forms of electronic eavesdropping, the new team gathered. It was Kilo's squad, Anya, and Naruto. The room was small, the air tasting of static and secrets. Anya Prohe. CTED the fragmented file onto a central console. Most of it was thick black lines of redaction. Project Chimera was a biogenetics research facility, Anya explained, pointing to a single, unredacted line. Located in the southern range of the Jacinto Mountains. Its mandate was vague. Human potentiality advancement, and exotic energy application. It was officially sealed in its existence SC. Rubbed from the record 7 years before E-Day. Exotic energy application, Baird repeated, his eyes gleaming. Chakra. They were studying it. Before the locust, before everything. But how did they even know about it? And how does my energy match a project from a world I've never been to? Naruto added, his brow furrowed. The question was a paradox that twisted the foundations of his reality. I don't know, Anya admitted. The facility should be a ghost. But the locust got a ping from it when they scanned your signature. That means something is still active in there. Something that resonates with you. So we go there, Phoenix stated simply. Hoffman's lockdown is a problem. A problem I can solve, Baird said with a smirk. He's locked down the active motor pool. But I know this base better than he does. There's a long-term storage depot. Bay 12. Full of decommissioned hardware from the old wars. Including a few Mark-1 Armadillo APCs. Old, loud, and ugly as my mother-in-law, but they're tough. And more importantly, they're not on the active network. I can get one running. That solves the how, Sam said, leaning over the console. But not the where. The exact coordinates were redacted. And even if we had them, all the main roads in that sector were destroyed during the hammer strikes. A heavy silence fell over the room. They had a ghost of a location and a ghost of a vehicle. They were trapped. The silence was broken by a soft chime from the room's access panel. Anya glanced at the security feed. It's Alara Vance, she said, surprised. She says she has a gift. After a moment of debate, Phoenix gave a curt nod. Anya opened the door. The journalist walked in, holding up her hands in a gesture of peace. She was holding a thin, flexible map. I told you a friend on the outside would be useful, Alara said, spreading the map on the console. It was not a cog map. It was an old, topographical survey chart from a private geological company. Before the cog nationalized everything, Private Corps did a lot of mining surveys in those mountains. They mapped every goat trail and access road, most of which were never put into official records. She pointed to a specific region. Project Chimera was built near an old obsidian mine. The cog bought the land and made it disappear. But the miners, they talk. And I listen. She tapped a location. There's your facility. And here, she traced a faint, winding line, is your road. It's treacherous, but it will get you there. The squad looked at each other. They were being handed the key by a complete outsider. What's your price? Phoenix asked, his voice laced with suspicion. The exclusive, Alara replied, her eyes meeting Naruto's. I ride with you. I document what we find. The real story, not the version Hoffman will inevitably try to spin. The world deserves to know the truth about the secrets the cog buried. Naruto studied her. She was ambitious, opportunistic, but he sensed no malice in her. Only a fierce, burning desire for the truth. He looked at Phoenix and nodded. She comes. The plan was set. The heist of the Armadillo was scheduled for 0300, during the graveyard shift change when the skeleton crew was at its most complacent. While Baird and Dom slipped away to prep the vehicle, Naruto found Sam in one of Anvil Gate's cavernous, underused firing ranges. The sharp crack of her lance echoed in the enclosed space as she methodically punched holes in a paper target. But her shots were scattered, her posture tight with frustration. Something on your mind? Naruto asked, his voice cutting through the ringing in her ears. Sam lowered her rifle, sighing. This whole thing, Chimera, the secrets, it's always the same story with the COG. They bury their mistakes, and good soldiers end up paying for them with blood. She ejected the magazine and slammed it onto a bench. I trust Kilo. I trust Marcus. And I trust you. Because you don't hide what you are. You put it all on the table. But this, going after some pre-war horror show, it feels like we're digging up a grave, and I'm worried about what we're going to find. Her words were a raw, honest expression of a soldier's weariness. He understood it perfectly. Graves are for the dead, Naruto said, walking closer. If this place is still active, it's not a grave. It's a wound, and the only way to deal with a wound is to open it up and clean it out. His simple, direct analogy seemed to cut through her frustration. She looked at him, at the quiet confidence in his eyes, and a small smile touched her lips. Clean it out, huh? I guess that's one way to put it. The shared understanding, the warrior-to-warrior connection, solidified between them, an unspoken pact forged in the quiet thunder of the firing range. At 0250, they moved. Anya, from a remote monitoring station, created a series of minor, distracting system malfunctions across the base, drawing the attention of the few roving patrols. Under this electronic cover, the team slipped into the dusty, silent expanse of Storage Bay 12. The Armadillo APC was a relic, a brutalist box of welded steel plates on 6 massive wheels. Dom, a master of stealth, had already disabled the bay's local surveillance, while Baird was inside the vehicle, his hands a blur of motion as he hot-wired the ignition systems. Almost there, Baird muttered, sweat beading on his brow. Come on, you old bitch, wake up. Naruto stood outside, his eyes closed, his senses extended. He was their early warning system. Patrol, 2 men, West Corridor. They'll pass the bay entrance in 30 seconds. He said calmly. Phoenix gave a sharp hand signal. Everyone froze, melting into the shadows cast by the hulking machinery. The footsteps of the patrol echoed in the distance, past the bay door, and faded. Now, Baird, Phoenix hissed. With a final, desperate connection, Baird slammed his fist on the console. The armadillo's engine coughed, sputtered, and then roared. To life with the sound of a waking giant, the diesel fumes filling the bay. We're live, Baird yelled. Alara, who had been documenting everything with a small, silent camera, scrambled aboard with Sam. Phoenix took the driver's seat. Naruto was the last one in, pulling the heavy rear hatch closed as Phoenix threw the ancient machine into gear. With a lurch and a groan, the armadillo rolled out of the bay and into a dark, deserted service tunnel, their escape from Anvil Gate secured. The journey was brutal. The abandoned mining road was less a road and more a scar on the face of the mountain, and a freezing, sleet-ridden storm had descended, turning the path into a treacherous river of mud. Inside the rattling, bone-jarring confines of the APC, Alara tried to conduct her interview. So, when you realized you were on another world, she asked Naruto, bracing herself against the lurching wall, what was the first thing you thought? I wondered if they had good ramen, Naruto replied with a straight face. The deadpan answer caught her off guard, and a genuine laugh escaped her lips, a rare, bright sound in the gloom of the cabin. His ability to find levity in the darkest of situations was yet another fascinating facet of his personality. Their journey came to a sudden halt. A chasm, 30 meters wide, split the path before them. The old stone bridge that had once spanned it lay in a heap of rubble at the bottom. Damn it, Phoenix swore, slamming his fist on the dashboard. Dead end. Baird was already running calculations. We don't have the equipment to bridge that. We'd have to go back. No, Naruto said. He got out of the APC, walking to the edge of the chasm, the freezing sleet plastering his blonde hair to his head. He looked across the gap, then down at the rock beneath his feet. We don't go back. He slammed his palms onto the ground. The others, watching from the APC, saw a brilliant network of blue chakra lines spread from his hands into the rock, like lightning in reverse. Earth style. Earth Dragon's Bridge. He yelled. The ground before them trembled. Then, with a sound of grinding, groaning rock, the very edge of the chasm began to move. Rock and earth tore themselves from the cliff face, rising and twisting in the air, held together by an impossible, invisible force. They flowed across the chasm, solidifying into a wide, sturdy arch of solid rock, connecting their side to the other. It wasn't elegant. It was raw, primal, and utterly breathtaking. Everyone stared, speechless. Alara's camera was forgotten in her hand. Baird's jaw was slack. Sam just shook her head in disbelief. Well, Phoenix finally grunted, putting the APC back in gear. That's one way to do it. They drove across the impossible bridge, the storm finally beginning to break as they reached the coordinates Alara had provided. The location was nothing. A sheer, unremarkable cliff face of dark obsidian rock. This is it? Sam asked, her voice filled with disappointment. There's nothing here. Baird's scanners confirmed it. She's right. I'm reading meters of solid, volcanic rock. No cavities, no energy signatures. Nothing. Alara looked crestfallen. The coordinates must have been wrong. But Naruto walked forward, ignoring them. He approached the smooth, black wall of rock, the place where a door should have been. He closed his eyes, placing his palm flat against the cold, wet stone. He wasn't looking for a door. He was listening for a song, a distant echo of the energy he knew so well, the energy that was his own. He channeled a small, controlled pulse of his chakra into the rock. Like a key into a lock. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, a low hum began to vibrate through the cliff face. Intricate, glowing blue lines, mirroring the chakra pathways in his own body, spread out from his hand, tracing the outline of a massive, circular door that had been perfectly, invisibly, fused with the mountain. With a deep, grinding groan of ancient mechanisms turning to life for the first time in decades, the stone door began to retract into the mountain. It revealed a yawning, black maw that exhaled a gust of air that smelled of long stale antiseptic, ionized dust. And something else. Something metallic and coppery, like old blood. Naruto turned to the others, his face grim in the eerie blue glow of the doorway. Project Chimera wasn't built in the mountain, he said, his voice grave. The facility is the mountain. And it's been waiting for me. Chapter 7 End. Chapter 8. The First Echo. The air that bled from the open portal was not merely stale, it was static. A dead atmosphere preserved with the chilling perfection of a specimen in a jar. It carried the faint, layered sense of ozone from dormant electronics, the sterile tang of long-evaporated antiseptic, and a cold, metallic undertone that clung to the back of the throat. It was the smell of a place where time itself had been put on hold. Naruto stepped across the threshold, and the world changed. The howling sleet and the raw, natural chaos of the mountainside were cut off as if by a surgeon's scalpel. Here, there was only silence, a profound, humming quiet that was more unnerving than any roar. The blue, glowing lines of the massive circular door pulsed softly, casting long, geometric shadows down the corridor ahead. Hilo's squad and Alara followed him in, their heavy boots Oud and intrusive in the tomb-like stillness. The rear blast door groaned shut behind them, sealing them inside the mountain, the final thump of its closure echoing with a grim finality. Okay, Baird whispered, his voice hushed as he raised a scanner, its green light painting his face in the gloom. I'm officially creeped out. Power grid is on deep standby, not offline. Life support is active, cycling air. No life signs, human or grub. This place isn't abandoned. It's in hibernation. It feels empty, Sam murmured, her lancer held high, the attached flashlight beam cutting a sharp, nervous cone through the darkness. Too empty. No, Naruto corrected her, his voice quiet. He stood with his eyes closed, his senses reaching out, tasting the very fabric of the facility. Not empty, sleeping, and it knows we're here. He could feel it, a faint, resonant hum that tickled the edge of his senses. It was a distorted, corrupted echo of his own chakra, like a familiar song played on a broken instrument. They moved forward, a tight, wary formation, down a corridor of polished, seamless obsidian that seemed to drink the light from their flashlights. They entered a vast, central concourse, and a collective gasp went through the squad. The place was pristine, a multi-leveled atrium of brushed metal and white polymer. It looked as though its occupants had simply vanished mid-sentence. Slates lay on desks next to half-finished mugs of solidified coffee. A pen lay on the floor where it had been dropped. On a large viewscreen that dominated one wall, a stock market ticker from 2 decades ago was frozen in time. There were no signs of a struggle, no bodies, no blood. Just the profound, unsettling absence of life. It's a ghost ship, Alara breathed, her small camera panning slowly across the scene. Her journalistic instincts warring with a primal urge to flee. They just walked away. Or something made them leave, Phoenix growled, his eyes scanning the shadowed upper levels. Anya, are you getting any of this? Sam asked into her comm. Anya's voice, patched through the armadillo's comms link which Baird had managed to slave to their helmet sets, was a lifeline of distant sanity. I'm getting Baird's sensor telemetry. It's impossible. The facility's systems are pristine. According to COG archives, this place was decommissioned due to a containment failure. But there's no evidence of failure. No structural damage, no radiation, no biocontaminants. Then the records were a lie, Naruto stated. His attention was drawn to a series of heavy blast doors leading off the concourse. Each labeled with a different designation: biostasis, genetics, energy applications. The truth is in there. They chose the door marked genetics. As Baird hacked the ancient, offline security system, Naruto placed a hand on the wall beside it. The faint, corrupt hum was stronger here. It felt familiar, sickeningly so. It was like recognizing a family member's face on a corpse. The door slid open, and the smell hit them first. A stronger, more chemical version of the antiseptic, mixed with the faint, coppery scent of old blood. The room was a laboratory, filled with strange, Arcane equipment that made Baird's eyes light up with technical curiosity. But the room's centerpiece was a row of tall, cylindrical stasis pods, their glass clouded with frost. Dom, who had been silent for most of the journey, moved towards the first pod, wiping away the frost with his gauntlet. He recoiled as if burned. Gods. Inside the pod, floating in a murky, amber fluid, was a human figure. Or what had once been human. Its limbs were elongated, its skin a pale, translucent white, and a series of small, fin-like appendages grew from its spine. Its eyes were wide, staring, and completely black. They moved down the row. Each pod contained a different horror, a different failure. A subject with skin like hardened bark. Another with vestigial wings sprouting from its shoulder blades. They were the monstrous rough drafts of creation, the abandoned sketches of a god who had no concept of sanctity. This is what Chimera was, Alara said, her voice shaking but her camera steady. Human experimentation. Baird, who had managed to activate a nearby console, looked up, his face pale. It's worse. I've got lab notes. They were trying to force mutations, rewrite the human genome on the fly. They were searching for a specific sequence, a receptor gene, they believed was necessary to attract and metabolize an anomalous, extra-dimensional bioenergy. The room went cold. All eyes turned to Naruto. They were looking for you, Sam breathed. Or for people who could use what you use. How? Naruto asked, his voice tight. How did they even know it existed? His answer lay in the next room. The project director's office. It was Spartan, dominated by a single, large obsidian desk. On the desk was a single data slate. Baird plugged it into his own device, his fingers flying across its surface. It's a video log, the final entry of a drive. Elias Thorne. Anya's voice cut in, sharp with recognition. Aris Thorne's father. He was the original head of the project. He was officially listed as deceased in a lab accident. Let's see what the dead have to say, Phoenix grunted. Baird projected the video onto the office wall. The image flickered to life, showing the face of an older man who shared his son's sharp, aquiline features, but his eyes held a terrifying, feverish light of obsession. He was in the same office, looking haggard, his lab coat stained. Final entry, the recorded Thorne began. His voice strained. The primary subject, the vessel, has proven to be a catastrophic failure. Its genetics were perfect, the receptor markers were present, but it could not handle the influx. The energy is too potent, too sentient. It doesn't just power the body, it rewrites the soul. He looked off camera, a sound of heavy, metallic scraping coming from beyond the frame. Fear flashed in his eyes. We found the source, he continued, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. Not by searching the stars, but by looking within. A fossilized creature, discovered deep in the obsidian mines. It was not of Sarah. Its DNA was alien, but its cells held the dormant echo of this incredible power. We synthesized it, reverse-engineered the gene sequence that could call to it. We built an antenna of flesh and blood. A loud crash sounded from off-screen. Thorne jumped, his eyes wide with terror. The subject is loose. The containment team, my God. It's not just strong. It's changing things, warping reality around it. It's an infection. We were wrong. This isn't the next stage of evolution. It's a plague. I'm initiating the Omega Protocol. A full systems purge and facility lockdown. It won't kill the subject. Nothing can, but it might trap it. May God forgive me. The recording cut out as a massive, shadowy claw smashed through the wall behind Thorne, followed by a scream that was abruptly silenced. The team stood in stunned silence, the ghost's final words hanging in the air. A fossil, Anya whispered over the comm. They found a creature from your world. Or one like it. That's the link. That's how they knew. The subject he created, Phoenix said, his hand tightening on his lancer. It's still here, trapped. We need to find the main data core, Naruto said, his mind racing. The pieces were slotting into place, forming a picture that was both monstrous and deeply personal. We need to know more about this vessel. They found it in the heart of the facility. A chamber marked energy applications. It was a vast, cathedral-like space. The walls were covered in what looked like massive, crystalline capacitors, all converging on a central, raised platform. On the platform was a single, larger stasis pod, but this one was different. It was shattered, the reinforced glass blown outwards, and the amber fluid had long ago drained away, leaving a dark, sticky residue. Naruto felt the corrupt chakra echo strongest here. This was the source. This was the throne room. He slowly walked up the steps to the platform. The others followed, their weapons raised. Scanning the shadows. On the base of the shattered pod was a metal plate, the designation of the experiment clearly engraved. Sam read it aloud, her voice trembling slightly. Subject 001. Project designation. Vessel. Family name match. She stopped, her blood running cold. She looked at Naruto, her eyes wide with horrified disbelief. Phoenix stepped closer, reading the final, impossible word on the plate. Uzumaki. The name hit Naruto like a physical blow. A wave of vertigo washed over him. His family name. Here, miles under the rock of a dead world, a world he had never known. A world that had somehow known him. The fossil, the genes, they had found a relative of his, an ancient, fossilized ancestor, and used their DNA as a template to create a monster. He reached out a trembling hand, his fingers tracing the letters of his own name, a name that was supposed to represent hope and heroism, now forever linked to this house of horrors. It's not possible, he breathed. Naruto, look out, Alara screamed. At the moment of his profound shock, his emotional turmoil, the facility, which had been sleeping, finally woke up. The blue lines on the walls and the massive capacitors flared to life. Not with a calm, steady light, but with an angry, predatory crimson. The low hum rose to a piercing shriek. A recorded voice, Elias Thorne's, echoed through the chamber. Cold and devoid of all emotion. Omega Protocol disengaged. Anomalous energy signature detected. Subject 001 energy levels matched. Final containment protocol. Echo Harvest, now active. Naruto cried out, stumbling to one knee. It wasn't a physical attack. It was a violation. He felt 1,000 invisible hooks sink into his very soul, into his chakra network. The facility was a gigantic parasite, and it had just latched onto its intended host. The red lines on the walls pulsed in time with his own heartbeat, and he could feel his vast energy reserves being siphoned away, drawn out of him. Feeding the long-dormant machine. It's using him as a power source. Baird yelled, his scanner going haywire. The whole damn mountain is draining him. The stolen energy didn't just disappear. It flowed from the capacitors into the center of the room, coalescing in the air above the shattered stasis pod. It swirled and solidified, taking on a shape. A familiar shape. It formed a perfect, shimmering, crimson-red copy of Naruto himself. It had his face, his hair, his clothes, but its eyes were hollow, black voids of pure malice, and its body radiated the same corrupt, hateful energy of the berserker and the creature from Thorne's log. It was the echo, the ghost in the machine, the psychic residue of the failed Subject 001, given form and substance by Naruto's own stolen power. The Crimson Echo looked at Naruto, its creator and its fuel source, and it smiled a slow, terrible smile filled with a century of trapped, agonizing loneliness and rage. And then it spoke, its voice a distorted, mocking mimicry of Naruto's own. Finally, it hissed, a real body. Thank you, brother. Chapter 8 End. Chapter 9. The brother in the static. The being that coalesced from Naruto's stolen life force was a blasphemy in motion. It was not a clone. A clone was a perfect copy, a vessel of shared will. This thing was a caricature, a funhouse mirror reflection built from pain and tinted with blood. The Crimson Echo shimmered under the angry red light of the awakened facility, its form unstable, like a heat haze rising from a killing field. Its smile was Naruto's smile, but stripped of all warmth and humor, leaving only a predatory, mocking cruelty. Brother, it hissed again, the word a discordant chord in the humming silence. So long, so very long I've been waiting. Trapped in the dark, listening to the silence, and dreaming of you. What are you? Naruto grunted, forcing himself to a single knee. The drain was a physical agony, 1,000 leeches pulling at his very soul. Every pulse of his heart sent a fresh wave of his power into the facility, and in turn, into the echo, making it more solid, more real. The echo laughed, a sound like tearing metal. I am the first echo. The original failure. The Uzumaki who wasn't strong enough. They built me from the dust of our ancestors, but I couldn't hold the power. It drove me mad, and when I broke, they locked me in this machine, this soul cage. My mind became static, my pain became the ghost. And now, you, the real thing, have come to open the door. It took a step forward, its movements a jerky, predatory imitation of Naruto's fluid grace. You are the key, and you are the fuel. This facility was designed to contain me, but with your power, I can make it my castle. And then, my weapon. Like hell you will, Sam yelled, and the spell was broken. She opened fire, her lancer spitting a stream of bullets that stitched across the Echo's chest. The impacts had no effect. The bullets passed through its shimmering form as if through smoke, embedding themselves in the wall behind it. The Echo turned its head with an unnervingly slow motion, its black, void-like eyes fixing on Sam. Annoying, it whispered. It vanished. Not a flicker step, not a burst of speed. It simply ceased to be in one place and appeared directly in front of her. Before Sam could even register the movement, the Echo's hand shot out, grabbing her by the throat and lifting her off the ground, her feet kicking uselessly in the air. Sam! Dom roared, charging forward. Phoenix and Baird opened fire, their rounds equally ineffective. The Echo ignored them, its attention focused on the choking woman in its grasp. I felt your connection to him, it hissed, its face inches from hers. The respect, the interest. Let me show you what this power really looks like when it's not held back by pointless sentiment. It began to squeeze. Sam's face turned purple, her struggles weakening. Let her go, Naruto roared. He forced himself to his feet, a swirling sphere of blue chakra grinding into existence in his palm. It was a struggle, like trying to form the Rasengan underwater, the facility fighting him for every scrap of energy. The Echo's head snapped towards him, its smile widening. Ah, there it is. The righteous anger. Fight me, brother. The more you struggle, the more you use your power, the stronger I become. Your rage is my food. It casually tossed Sam aside. She crashed into a bank of consoles, slumping to the floor, gasping for air. The Echo then formed its own Rasengan. But it was a perversion. Jagged, unstable spikes of crimson energy erupted from its surface. And it crackled with malevolent black lightning. It was not a tool of overwhelming force, it was an instrument of pure, agonizing torture. It charged. Naruto met the charge, their twin spheres of power colliding in the center of the room. The explosion was not blue and clean, but a violent, chaotic eruption of red and black energy that threw them both backwards. Naruto skidded across the floor, his arm burned and bleeding. The Echo landed gracefully, its form flickering but unharmed. And Naruto felt it. The energy he had expended in his Rasengan had been instantly siphoned by the facility and fed back into the Echo. He was fighting himself, and he was losing. You see, the Echo taunted, its form becoming more stable, more defined. Your every action empowers me. Your every struggle tightens your own chains. It turned its attention back to the others. Now, for the rest of the insects. It made a single hand sign, one Naruto knew well. Wind style. Scythe dance. It exhaled, not a gale, but a series of razor-sharp, invisible blades of wind that sliced through the air. But unlike Naruto, it didn't aim for the soldiers. It aimed for the machinery around them. The lab equipment, the consoles, the gantries, they were all torn apart, exploding into a storm of metal shrapnel. It was a maelstrom of flying, razor-sharp debris. Take cover, Phoenix yelled, diving behind a reinforced server bank. Dom tackled Alara, shielding her with his own body as shrapnel rained down around them. The Echo was a master of chaos. It wasn't trying to kill them with one blow. It was terrorizing them, turning their environment into a weapon, enjoying their fear. Baird, Naruto yelled, his mind racing past the pain. The facility. It's the key. Cut the power. Baird, who had found shelter behind the base of the shattered stasis pod, looked up from his slate, his face grim. I can't. It's a closed loop. It's drawing power from you and shunting it directly into that thing. There's no external source to cut, no switch to flip. It's a goddamn parasite. The Echo laughed again, a triumphant, ringing sound. The little mechanic is smart. This mountain is my body now. And you, brother, are its heart. As long as you are here, as long as you have power, I am immortal. It began to walk towards Naruto, a predator closing in for the kill. It's a shame, really. I can feel your life. The people you knew, the world you lost, so much pain, so much loneliness. You and I, we are the same. The last Uzumaki, stranded, alone, monsters that the world doesn't understand. Its words were hooks, digging into Naruto's deepest insecurities. The loneliness of his childhood, the burden of being a Jinchuriki, the profound isolation he felt on this strange, dying world. The Echo was weaponizing his own soul against him. But I will not be a monster in a cage, the Echo snarled, its face contorting in rage. I will be a king. I will take this world of ruin and burn it down to the last atom. Just to watch the pretty lights. Hilo's squad was pinned down. Naruto was being drained, his own power used against him. Every option led to a dead end. Physical assault was futile. There was no technical solution. They were trapped in a perfect loop of death. It was Phoenix who saw the opening. Not in the Echo, but in its psychology. Naruto, he yelled over the storm of shrapnel. It's a child. It's throwing a tantrum. It doesn't know how to be a soldier. It's all rage, no discipline. Use it. Phoenix's words cut through the haze of pain and doubt in Naruto's mind. He was right. The Echo was powerful, but it was sloppy. It was all raw emotion, no control. And Naruto knew that emotion. He had lived it. The rage of the Kyuubi, the loneliness of the outcast. He looked at the Echo, not as an enemy, but as a subject, as a victim. This creature was the ghost of his ancestor, a soul that had been tortured, broken, and trapped for a century. Its rage was not its own, it was the only thing it had ever known. A desperate, insane plan began to form in his mind. A gamble so absolute that it bordered on suicide. He couldn't fight the drain. He couldn't starve the parasite. So he would do the opposite. He would drown it. Everyone, listen to me, Naruto shouted, his voice ringing with a new, strange authority. I need you to buy me 30 seconds. No matter what, keep it distracted. Don't try to hurt it. Just keep it busy. Sam, nursing her bruised throat, looked at Phoenix, who gave a sharp, decisive nod. You heard him. Do it. What followed was a masterclass in defiance. Hilo's squad stopped trying to fight and started trying to annoy. Sam and Phoenix laid down suppressive fire, not at the Echo, but at points all around it, forcing it to move, disrupting its concentration. Dom, using his knowledge of demolitions, began shooting at structural weak points in the ceiling, causing chunks of rock and metal to rain down, forcing the Echo to dodge. Baird, abandoning his slate, began ripping out power conduits by hand, causing showers of harmless but spectacular sparks, creating a chaotic light show. The Echo roared in frustration. Insects, you cannot harm me. No, Alara Vance said from her hiding spot, her voice broadcast through the comms as she recorded everything. But they can stand with him. Their defiance, their willingness to die for him, was a shield. And behind that shield, Naruto prepared his final gambit. He sat down, crossing his legs, assuming a meditative pose amidst the chaos. He closed his eyes, shutting out the storm around him. He turned his senses inward, to the raging sea of his own chakra, and to the 1,000 hooks of the facility that were trying to drain it. He stopped resisting. He opened the floodgates. It was an act of complete and utter surrender. He let go of his control, his discipline, his will to fight. He channeled the entirety of his vast, near-limitless chakra reserves and pushed. He didn't just allow the facility to drain him. He actively force-fed it, pumping his life force into its parasitic veins with the force of a bursting dam. The effect was instantaneous and catastrophic. The red lights of the facility flared, turning an incandescent, blinding white. The piercing shriek of the machinery rose in pitch until it was a physical blow against the eardrums. The crystalline capacitors on the walls began to crack, unable to handle the sudden, overwhelming surge of pure, untainted energy. The Crimson Echo screamed, a sound of pure agony. It clutched its head, its shimmering form beginning to violently destabilize. It was a creature born of a trickle of stolen, corrupted power. This flood of pure, willful energy was poison to it. It was like trying to pour the entire ocean into a teacup. No, stop. It's too much. It shrieked, its form flickering between its monstrous shape and the terrified, translucent face of the original subject 001. For a single, fleeting moment, the black voids of its eyes cleared, and in them, Naruto saw not malice, but a century of unbearable, soul-crushing pain. Naruto, his own body now racked with the agony of complete energy depletion, opened his eyes. He looked at the tortured spirit before him and spoke, his voice a weak, empathetic whisper. "I know your pain," he said. "I know your loneliness. But it's over now. You can rest." His words, an act of acceptance and not of condemnation, were the final blow. The echo looked at him, its face a mask of shock and dawning peace. The rage that had sustained it for a century finally broke, washed away by this impossible act of empathy. "Brother," it whispered, its voice no longer a mocking hiss, but a sigh of release. And then it dissolved, not in an explosion, but in a soft, gentle cascade of golden light particles that rained down through the chamber before winking out into nothingness. Silence. The blinding white light of the facility faded back to a dim, emergency blue. The shriek of the machinery died, replaced by the sound of cracking, cooling metal. On the central platform, Naruto Uzumaki slumped forward, his body completely devoid of energy, and collapsed into unconsciousness. Naruto. Sam was the first to reach him. Turning him over, he was pale, his breathing shallow, but he was alive. "The main reactor is critical," Baird yelled, his scanner now miraculously working. His energy surge fried the whole damn mountain. "We've got maybe 5 minutes before this place entombs itself for good." He scrambled to the central console near the shattered pod, where a single, crystalline data core was now glowing softly. "Got it. The core. All of Chimera's research. Let's go." Phoenix lifted Naruto's limp form, throwing him over his shoulder with surprising gentleness. "Move. Now." They ran. EY sprinted through the dying facility as the lights flickered and failed, as emergency blast doors began to slam shut around them. They scrambled back into the armadillo, Phoenix laying Naruto down gently in the back. Baird gunned the engine as the massive circular entrance door began to grind its way shut. "We're not gonna make it," Dom yelled from the back. The door was a foot from being sealed when a final, weak pulse of golden chakra flared from Naruto's unconscious form. It lashed out, striking one of the door's ancient gears. The mechanism shattered, and the massive stone door froze in place. A gap just wide enough for the APC to scrape through. They burst out into the pre-dawn light, the storm having passed, leaving the air clean and cold. Behind them, the mountain groaned, a final, deep tremor shaking the ground before the entrance collapsed completely, burying Project Chimera and its ghosts forever. Inside the APC, Sam used a medkit to tend to Naruto's minor burns. Alara sat in stunned silence. Her camera finally lowered, her mind trying to process the fact that she had just witnessed a man defeat a monster by forgiving it. Anya's frantic voice crackled over the comm. "Hilo, I've lost the facility's telemetry." "What happened?" "Report." Phoenix, his eyes on the road ahead, keyed his mic. "The ghosts are gone, Anya. We're coming home." He paused, then added, "And Hoffman knows. We have inbound COG air support. Not friendly. They're trying to cut us off." They had survived the tomb. They had defeated the echo of the past. But now, as they raced down the mountainside with Air unconscious savior and a data core full of damning secrets, they faced a new enemy. Not the locust, but the coalition of ordered governments itself. Chapter 9 End. The end. Remember to subscribe and like this video. See you in the next video.